relations with. A very good morning and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep. Welcome to another session on international relations. Yesterday, we were talking about India's relations with China. We had covered the entire boundary dispute between India and China, and we understood several key topics related to India China relations. We even spoke about the One Belt, One Road initiative. We discussed what is the China Pakistan economic corridor. We spoke about the string of pearls theory as well. So today, we have a few more topics left. So let's wrap up the chapter and then we shall be looking at the Indian Ocean region. So let's start with the South China Sea dispute. Both from a prelims and mains point of view, the topic is very, very important. Over the last 2 decades, South China Sea has become a flashpoint between China and few Southeast Asian countries. China has been very aggressive in this region with regard to these maritime disputes. And China has even broken international rules and it has disrupted the rules based order in the Indo Pacific. So, this makes the topic very, very important as India has a lot of interest in the South China Sea. So, let's understand what this dispute is all about. See, the South China Sea, which is located over here, is a very important water body which is part of the Indo Pacific region. It's right in the middle of the Indo Pacific, it's right at the heart of the Indo Pacific. It essentially forms a connection between Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. A large part of global trade passes through the South China Sea. According to several estimates, almost 60% of global trade is today passing through South China Sea. Because over the last 30 years, the Indo-Pacific has emerged as the focal point of the global economy and geopolitics. Because prior to 1990s, that is from 1950s to 1990s, during the Cold War period, the hub of the global economy and all the major geopolitical developments, they used to take place around the Atlantic Ocean. This is where the focus of the global economy was. And even the focus of global geopolitics was in and around the Atlantic. Because all the major powers and major economies were present around the Atlantic. Be it US, the European countries, even Soviet Union. They were all major powers towards the Atlantic, and that's where the global attention was focused upon. But after the Cold War ended, after Soviet Union collapsed, even European powers saw an economic decline. Right? Most of the Western European democracies, they saw a stagnation in their growth. And in general, they have seen a decline in their power status. But parallelly, we have seen the rise of Asia from 1990s onwards. Asian powers like India, China, Japan, and of course all the Southeast Asian countries, they have driven tremendous growth in the region. And today, in the last 3 decades, the Indo-Pacific has become the focal point of the global economy. And this is where all the major geopolitical developments are taking place. So you see this shift from the Atlantic towards the Indo-Pacific with regard to the focus on global economy and global geopolitics. So the importance of Indo-Pacific has increased year by year, and South China Sea sits right at the heart. A large part of global trade passes through this water body, and almost 40% of global oil shipments also pass through the South China Sea. So as a result, South China Sea becomes very, very crucial. It gains a lot of significance, and it is also blessed with plenty of resources. It is blessed with hydrocarbons. It is blessed with fisheries. And it is also said to contain several precious minerals, including rare earth elements on the seafloor. So the region is rich with resources and it is an important sea lane of communication. As far as global trade and shipping is concerned, it's a very important sea lane of communication. So no wonder all these powers are competing for influence, and China in particular is looking for territorial expansion as well. So if you look at this map here, you can see the route from Indian Ocean to the Malacca Strait near Singapore and Indonesia, and how the route passes from here towards South China Sea and then reaches out into the Pacific. Right? This shipping route is extremely vital for the global economy. So when it comes to these maritime boundaries, to decide the maritime boundaries, we have a convention, a UN convention called the UNCLOS, the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. It is this convention which defines the maritime zones and what jurisdiction countries will have in these maritime zones. So according to UNCLOS, there are different types of maritime zones. You have your territorial waters, which extends to 12 nautical miles from your baseline. Baseline is this imaginary line that runs along your coastline, right? So from there, from the coastline, if you measure 12 nautical miles into the sea, that becomes your territorial waters. A distance of 12 nautical miles from your coastline becomes your territorial waters. As the name itself indicates, this is the territorial waters of that country, meaning the country will have full jurisdiction. All the laws of that country will apply here. The country will have full jurisdiction over this region. It's as good as your territory, your land. Whatever jurisdiction and laws apply on your land, the same applies in the territorial waters as well. Now, let's say you take India, for example. So from the Indian coastline, you measure 12 nautical miles. That becomes our territorial waters. In this patch of water, we will have full jurisdiction. Understood? We will have complete jurisdiction. In every area, in every issue, we will have full jurisdiction and Indian laws will apply in territorial waters. In territorial waters, we can even deny entry to foreign vessels if required. We will have the powers to deny entry to foreign vessels if the government determines that the ship shouldn't enter our territorial waters. However, if a ship is requesting innocent passage, if a ship just wants to pass through innocently, meaning without threatening our country, without carrying out espionage against us, without carrying arms and weapons or using them to threaten India, right, or without getting involved in criminal activities, right, if it can prove that it is simply innocently passing through and ask for permission, then we might permit innocent passage. Innocent passage is also allowed provided if the ship does not threaten our security interests. So this is the kind of jurisdiction a country, a coastal state, enjoys in its territorial waters. A country has full jurisdiction. It can deny entry to any ship. It can basically prevent freedom of navigation, and only innocent passage can be allowed if the ship requests innocent passage and proves that it's passing through innocently. Now, once you cross your territorial waters, once you cross that 12 nautical mile line, you are entering international waters. You're stepping into international waters where international law will apply. UNCLOS provisions will apply and your jurisdiction becomes limited. Is that clear? Now, within international waters, you have contiguous zone, which extends for another 12 nautical miles from your territorial waters. From the boundary of your territorial waters, you measure another 12 nautical miles into international waters. So that is your contiguous zone. It's like a buffer zone. In the contiguous zone, the coastal state will have limited jurisdiction over some subjects like defense, environmental protection of the marine area, dealing with oil spills, imposing your custom laws and taxation laws, dealing with smuggling and trafficking, dealing with piracy and other security threats. So with regard to these subjects, the coastal state will still have powers in this part of the international waters as well. All right. The moment you cross your territorial waters, right, your jurisdiction almost comes to an end. You're entering international waters where UN clause provisions will apply. But within international waters, you have a buffer zone, the contiguous zone, that comes right after your territorial waters. It measures for another 12 nautical miles. So here, the country will have limited jurisdiction. In few areas, in few subjects, the state will exercise jurisdiction with regard to taxation, tackling smuggling, crime, and any security threat, environmental issues. In these areas, the country will have jurisdiction in contiguous zone as well. But apart from that, international law will apply here. So according to UN clause in international waters, freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in the airspace above is a basic right, a fundamental right, which cannot be denied by anyone. Is that clear? Now let's say a foreign vessel or a foreign aircraft is passing through international waters or the airspace above it. In this region, since it's international waters, the right to navigate, the right to fly over this region is a fundamental right in international law. No country can deny this freedom of navigation. No one can block or intercept the right of a vessel or a flight to pass through this region unless they are posing a threat to the security of that country. Is that clear? Let's say a commercial ship wants to pass through the contiguous zone of India. India can't block the entry unless and until there is a valid reason to show that the ship is threatening our security. If we prevent the navigation of the ship, then it is a breach of UN clause. Understood? Freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight. It applies to the airspace above as well. Right? You are entering international territory. The UN clause provisions will apply here, where freedom to navigate and fly over is a basic right. It can't be denied unless and until there is a real threat to your security. Understood? Now, understanding these maritime zones and the jurisdictions is very, very important. All right. Now, you have another maritime zone, which is called as the exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, exclusive economic zone. I'm sure many of you would have heard about it. Exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. This is where the coastal state has exclusive economic rights. Exclusive economic rights are enjoyed by the coastal state in its EEZ. Meaning, whatever resources are present in the EEZ, it belongs exclusively to that country. The hydrocarbons, the oil and gas reserves, fisheries, and any precious minerals on the seabed. Any resource in this part of the water body exclusively belongs only to that country. Foreign vessels cannot exploit these resources. No foreign exploitation is allowed. But ships can pass through. No foreign exploitation is allowed. But ships and aircraft, they can pass through. Because navigation is different. Exploiting resources is different. All right, in India's EEZ, which will be a very, very large area, Chinese ships, Pakistani ships can pass through. We can't block their entry. All right, but they can't exploit our resources. The resources are exclusively for India. So like this, every coastal state will have its own EEZ, exclusive economic zone. This is measured from the baseline, from the coastline. That is where your territorial waters begin. That is where it is measured. That is where it starts. Any idea what could be the extent of your EEZ? Till what distance does your EEZ extend? Very good. Generally, it extends up to 200 nautical miles. All right, I'm saying generally, because this can't be a rule everywhere. It depends on the geography of that place. There are certain water bodies where multiple countries are jammed into one location. So not everyone will get a EEZ of 200 nautical miles. It's impossible. It's practically impossible. So in such closed, enclosed water bodies, customized solution is worked out between the countries. Now, let's say you take Bay of Bengal or Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf is a much narrow water body, right? Of course, all those countries in West Asia, they can't get EEZ of 200 nautical miles. So what they do, they negotiate their maritime boundaries. They bilaterally talk to each other as per the provisions of UN clause, and they resolve their maritime boundary and identify their EEZs. So customized solutions are provided for such areas. But where it is possible, right, it will extend up to 200 nautical miles. From your baseline, that is from your coastline, if you measure 200 nautical miles, which includes your territorial waters contiguous zone, that becomes your EEZ, exclusive economic zone. Can this extend beyond 200 nautical miles? Yes or no? Is there a possibility to extend this beyond 200 nautical miles? Very few are saying yes. Srihari has given the answer as well. Very good. Definitely it can be extended. It can extend up to 350 nautical miles. But there is a condition. You have to prove that your continental shelf is extending beyond 200 nautical miles. If you prove that your continental shelf is extending beyond 200 nautical miles, then till where your continental shelf extends with a maximum of 350 nautical miles, till there your EEZ can be extended. Understood? So depending on how your continental shelf is extending, right, if it's extending beyond 200 nautical miles, you need to provide evidence for that. You need to argue for this, demand for this, and prove that your continental shelf is extending, and until that line with a maximum of 350 nautical miles can become your EEZ, exclusive economic zone. If any foreign countries or foreign vessels are trying to exploit resources in your EEZ, that is illegal. It is poaching, essentially. Is that clear? The countries can act against it. So countries can defend their economic rights. They can use their defense forces, their coast guards, to defend their economic rights in their EEZ. So this is how the UN clause assigns maritime jurisdiction. It defines the maritime zones and defines the jurisdiction, thus providing for a rules-based order to prevent conflicts. This is what you mean by a rules-based order. Basically, there are a set of international rules which, if it is followed by everyone, it provides for stability. It provides for clarity. There will be no confusion. There will be no need for any disputes, any conflicts, if the international rules is simply followed by everyone. Is that clear? This will essentially provide for a free and open Indo-Pacific. If you're just looking at Indo-Pacific region, if every country follows the rules-based order, follows these maritime zones and jurisdiction, follows all the rules of UN clause, it will provide for free and open Indo-Pacific, meaning you'll have free navigation, freedom of navigation and overflight can be guaranteed to everybody in international waters. All right, freedom of navigation and even freedom of overflight can be guaranteed in the international waters. Now, what if disputes come up? What will happen? What if countries raise a dispute? What if one country claims the jurisdiction of another country? Right? Let's say the EEZ of one country is overlapping with the others. Let's say one country is claiming more EEZ and this overlaps with the EEZ of another country. Right? This could become a source of dispute. So what will happen if disputes arise? Even that is dealt under UN clause. If disputes exist, they can approach the Permanent Court of Arbitration and the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea to get the disputes resolved through arbitration and judicial process. The International Tribunal on Law of the Sea. It functions within the jurisdiction of PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration. All right, it's an arbitration body. It's an international arbitration body to settle disputes between different countries. It's headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. It's headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. All right. So PCA will carry out arbitration between the two countries which are having a dispute. It will apply UN clause provisions. It will look at the appeals of both the countries. It will look at all the evidence available, and then it will provide an award. It will pass a result or a judgment, which is called an award, which has to be followed by the member countries. Now, UN clause is definitely legally binding. Any country which signs and ratifies it will be legally bound by it. Even if you don't sign it, some of the provisions are seen as customary law. Even if you don't sign and ratify it, right, even if you're not part of UN clause, still there are many provisions which are customary law under international law. It becomes legally binding on almost every UN member. By being a member of the United Nations, by adopting the UN Charter, automatically UN clause will also become legally binding. But however, the rulings of PCA, which is also binding in nature, but some rogue countries which are threatening the rules-based order, they can reject the orders because PCA does not have any enforcement powers of its own. All right. Some countries which threaten rules-based order, which are aggressive and expansionist in nature, which don't respect international rules, they can break down the rules by rejecting the orders of PCA. And this is exactly what China is doing. China has raised aggressive claims for EEZ in the South China Sea. Based on these aggressive maritime claims, it has threatened and disrupted freedom of navigation and overflight of many countries. It has intercepted many ships and aircraft in international waters and threatened them openly by using military methods. It has claimed the EEZ of other countries and even tried occupying them aggressively, which is against UN clause, against international law. It has broken down the rules-based order, and hence it has destabilized the Indo-Pacific and threatened the very stability of the Indo-Pacific. It has even rejected the orders of PCA. There was a particular case, which I'll mention later. So PCA had given an award and China rejected it, and China didn't even follow the award of the PCA. Even though UN clause is binding, orders of PCA also becomes binding, but China has rejected it, and there is no punishment here because there is no strong enforcement international measure. All right. Now, let's see what are China's claims. Why is China claiming more EEZ? Or what exactly is it claiming? How does it threaten other countries? Let's look at that. Now, look at the second map that I have shared with you. You can see the South China Sea very clearly, right? Now, obviously, there are many countries present here in this, around this water body. It's not just China. There are many Southeast Asian countries as well. You have Vietnam. You have Malaysia, right? You have Indonesia. You have Brunei. You have Philippines. All these countries are present. Even they are the littorals of the South China Sea, and even their EEZ should be present here. Now, if you go back to the previous map, you can look at the EEZ of other countries. You can see how the EEZ of other countries is being highlighted here. There are many islands, by the way, in South China Sea. But China has directly challenged the EEZ of all these countries, and it has drawn its own line, its own imaginary line, to claim almost the entire South China Sea to itself. Can you see this U-shaped line? This is the 9-dash line. It was previously the 11-dash or 10-dash line. Now it's the 9-dash line. It's represented through 9 dashes. So it's a U-shaped line that China has drawn and claims that this whole area is China's EEZ. Now, by looking at it, you can easily tell this is unfair. If China is claiming almost 90% of South China Sea to itself, what about the EEZ of the other countries? Right? It will compromise their rights, their jurisdiction. So on what basis is China making these claims? China is basing these claims on historical records. Based on centuries old historical claims, it is claiming that South China Sea largely belongs to China. Claiming that Chinese empires used to dominate and rule these waters based on China's control of maritime activity in this region, right? It is claiming that most of the EEZ should belong to China. Now, this is blatantly against international rules. It's against UN clause. So by drawing this so-called 9-dash line, it's claiming most of the EEZ to itself, which directly violates and threatens the EEZ of the other countries. That is why the dispute has broken out. China has claimed many of these strategic islands that you can see here in the map, the Paracel and Spratly group of islands. It has used military action. The Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy, they have been extremely aggressive in the region and they have directly threatened the vessels of other countries. All right? So they have picked this dispute with multiple nations, and you should know which islands are disputed with which country. This could be important for your prelims as well. You can see the Paracel Islands over here. So this actually belongs to Vietnam. The Paracel group of islands over here should belong to Vietnam, and the EEZ around it should belong to Vietnam. But China has claimed it. China has threatened Vietnam over it. They've had some clashes as well. Apart from the territorial dispute it has created with Vietnam over here, right? They've even fought a conflict as well over the land border. Along with the land boundary issue, it has triggered a maritime issue as well with Vietnam. That's why China and Vietnam do not have good relations. They are quite hostile to each other. China has resorted to aggressive military tactics to expand its territory, to try and occupy islands in Paracel, and it has tried to undermine the EEZ claims of Vietnam. China has even threatened the movement of ships and aircraft in the region. I'll tell you one very interesting incident which happened in 2012. In 2012, Vietnam had invited India to explore oil in its EEZ near the Paracel Islands. By the way, India is a very good friend of Vietnam. We are strategic partners. We are very close in the security and defense domain. Given that even Vietnam has disputes with China, they have fought conflict as well, just like India. Naturally, India and Vietnam have become very close strategic defense partners. So Vietnam had invited India to explore the hydrocarbon potential in the South China Sea near the Paracel Islands. So India's ONGC Videsh Limited, had sent a ship to explore the hydrocarbon potential that Vietnam has in South China Sea. This Indian vessel was accompanied by the Indian Navy. Indian Navy also deployed a vessel to escort the ship. And these Indian vessels were navigating in Vietnam's EEZ along with Vietnam's ships. These waters here, they clearly belong to Vietnam according to UN clause. It's part of its EEZ. So in Vietnam's EEZ, we were jointly carrying out the oil exploration. So 2 Indian vessels were present, one ONGC vessel and one Indian Navy ship. These vessels were intercepted and threatened by the PLA Navy. The Chinese Navy, they established radio communication and issued an open threat to the Indian Navy and the OVL ship, asking them to turn back as they've entered Chinese EEZ. Is that clear? This was a direct threat to Indian vessels This was a disruption of freedom of navigation. We were in international waters, right? Where we had a right, a fundamental right to navigate and even explore, because Vietnam had invited us to explore. And this was Vietnam's EEZ. China had no business to intercept these vessels or threaten them. But the PLA Navy threatened the Indian vessels, leading to a minor standoff in 2012. Like this, China has done it again and again with multiple countries, with multiple ships and aircrafts. It has picked a dispute over Spratly group of islands over here. China claims the Spratly Islands to itself, right, at the EEZ around it. This actually belongs to multiple countries. It belongs to Vietnam and Malaysia, and part of it even belongs to Brunei and Indonesia. Is that clear? So Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, they have actual claims, legal correct claims on Spratly Islands and the EEZ present around it. It should be divided between them. But China is claiming the EEZ around Spratly Islands as well. There are many such islands here. There is an island called the Natuna Island. Please make a note. The Natuna Island, present roughly over here, actually belongs to Indonesia. But China has claimed the region for itself. The EEZ around it is being claimed by China. Then if you come to Philippines over here, can you see the Scarborough Shoal? There's also the Macclesfield Bank, Mischief Reef, and many such small island territories. They all belong to Philippines according to UN clause. But China is directly threatening Philippines, claiming all these islands and the EEZ around it. All right, every now and then clashes and tensions happen over here. That is why Philippines dragged China to the PCA and filed a case against China over the Scarborough Shoal dispute. In 2016, Philippines filed a case against China at the PCA according to UN clause provisions. To settle the dispute, according to UN clause, PCA was approached by Philippines. The Scarborough Shoal dispute was raised by Philippines, claiming its jurisdiction, and PCA went into the case, looked into the details of the case, and finally passed the award in favor of Philippines. The PCA's award went in favor of Philippines. The award favored Philippines. The PCA ordered that China should not meddle with Scarborough Shoal. It belongs to Philippines, and the EEZ around it belongs to Philippines. But China rejected the award. It didn't care about the award. All right, it rejected the ruling and it said PCA has no jurisdiction. PCA has no binding impact. This is how China behaves irresponsibly, and this is how it breaks international rules every time. All right, it has picked the Pratas Island dispute that includes Taiwan and the PRC. This is their internal dispute. The PRC and the Taiwan administration, right, they have their own territorial jurisdictional conflict going on because China claims whole of Taiwan to itself, right, which we studied yesterday. So Pratas Island is also disputed between them. Then if you come to East China Sea over here, in this part, the East China Sea, here you have an island called Senkaku Diaoyu Island. This island territory, it's in East China Sea. All right, it's called Senkaku or Diaoyu. This is a dispute between China and Japan. China and Japan have a standing dispute over Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, and Chinese Air Force and Chinese Navy, they have threatened the Japanese vessels and aircraft multiple times near Senkaku Diaoyu. Many Japanese naval ships, its commercial vessels, and even its aircraft, its Air Force fleet, they have been threatened and intercepted by the Chinese armed forces. Right? So this is how China has used military aggression. It has used military aggression to justify its illegal claims. And it has displayed expansionist tendencies in South China Sea. Is that clear? So this is a clear violation of UN clause and international law. That is why all the countries, they are putting pressure on China to abide by the rules-based order. Understood? So this affects not just the Southeast Asian countries. It affects all the major economic powers. Be it Australia, be it India, US, European powers, right? They all have major economic interests in the region. The disruption of movement of ships and aircraft is a major threat, and one mistake from any country could easily turn into a very big conflict or a war in the region, right? China has often fired at the fishing vessels. The Chinese Coast Guard, they're quite notorious in that regard. What they do is they approach these disputed areas, and if fishermen are fishing in the area from another country, they fire at their fishing vessels and sink the fishing boats. China has done this blatantly multiple times. China has even resorted to building artificial islands to enhance its claims and to turn them into military bases from where Chinese vessels and aircraft can dominate the region. It has created artificial islands. All right. So all these activities of China, it's against the UN clause provisions and it cannot be tolerated. So that is why India has aligned with like-minded countries. We have aligned with the United States, with Japan, and Australia. All the four countries are threatened by these activities of China. So they established a grouping called the Quad or the Quadrilateral, with the primary objective of establishing a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. When the Quad was formed, right, the primary objective of the Quad was to uphold the rules-based order and protect freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, they want to ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open. This is the vision of the Quad. This is the strategy that the Quad countries have been pursuing. They want Indo-Pacific to remain free and open. This goal was actually highlighted by Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was recently assassinated. It was Shinzo Abe who came out with this vision for Indo-Pacific. He said that Indo-Pacific has to be free and open. There should be no threat to freedom of navigation from any country, right? So based on this idea, the Quad came up. The Quadrilateral, which is a grouping of these four like-minded democracies, is focused on upholding the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific to protect freedom of navigation and to ensure that Indo-Pacific remains free and open. All right? So we support the Southeast Asian countries as well. The US has gone one step ahead. It has tried exploiting this issue to its own advantage as part of its geopolitical rivalry with China. The US has deliberately used the issue to poke at China and instigate China. The US is very close to Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines as well. So it keeps instigating them to take action against China, and US has deployed its military as well. The US Navy is constantly deployed in the region, which becomes a source of tension between US and China. So US is trying to look after its own self-interest, right? It's trying to dominate these areas, trying to counter China and contain China. And there is that angle as well. It's not that US is very selfless. It's looking after its own selfish interests actually. It's trying to retain its traditional dominance, trying to box China in, it's trying to encircle China and contain China by poking China with other countries. It's using Philippines and Vietnam, deploying its military constantly and threatening China as well. So the tensions have gone up between all these countries, leading to destabilization of South China Sea. All right, so that is why the topic is very, very relevant, and you should know what is India's position. Under our Indo-Pacific doctrine, our stand is very clear. We are against any such violation of international rules. We want UN clause to be upheld. We want the rules-based order to be implemented. And We support freedom of navigation and overflight to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open. Is that clear? Because a large part of India's trade also passes through South China Sea. Estimates say that around 30 to 45% of India's global trade is passing through South China Sea. All right, most of our exports and imports are passing through this water body. It's crucial for the Indian economy as well. So that is why India is also one of the stakeholders in the South China Sea issue. So based on what we have discussed, you can expect a possible prelims question, right? Especially the locations, the places that we have discussed, that could come as a prelims question for you. And the overall analysis could be very important for a mains question. Now let's take up the next topic. Let's study the nature of economic relations between India and China. This is another important topic, and you can expect a mains question just on economic ties between India and China. All right. So let's study the economic ties that we have and what issues do we have with China when it comes to our economic relations. Now, this topic is very, very important because China has become one of our largest trading partners. Usually, it is in the top two. Some years, it is the largest trading partner of India at the number one position. Sometimes it slips to second position as US will overtake it. All right. Usually, India's top two trading partners are China and US. Their position keeps interchanging. You can see here in the graph that I've added, it shows the trade data from 2015 to last year. You can see how China and US compare with regard to their total trade with India. So some years China is ahead, right? Some years US has overtaken China. So these are the top two trading partners of India. All right. Our trade volume is usually more than $100 billion. It's anywhere between 110 to 130, $139 billion. That is the range of our trade volume. If you take the total of our exports and imports, the trade volume is around anywhere between 110 to $139 billion. The problem is, in this trading relationship, there is a unequal relationship. The trade equation has become unequal. There is a massive trade deficit which has come up for India. We have very few exports to China. Out of the 120 or $130 billion trade relationship, we export hardly around 15 to 19 billion. Rest of it is all Chinese imports into India, which is close to 100 billion. There is a massive import dependency, essentially. India has a massive import dependency on China. We have very few exports going to China, which is just a small percentage of the trade relationship. Majority of the trade is dominated by Chinese exports to India, which means India has an import dependency. This is a critical dependency. Many sectors in India, they have a critical dependency on Chinese exports to India. Now, this could become a huge challenge because whenever the trade equation is so unfair, if it is biased towards one country, right, this is not healthy. Usually, a trade relationship should be balanced. Yes, there will be some deficit. A small deficit is fine. A small surplus is fine. But such an unequal equation is not beneficial for the other country, which is at the other receiving end of the trade deficit. Because China especially is known to leverage its trade influence and economic influence. It leverages its economic might and the trade influence it has over others and uses this for geopolitics. It uses this as a geopolitical tool against other countries. So India is deeply concerned about it. as there is a huge mismatch in the trade equation, our biggest fear is that China will exploit the leverage that it has against India. And India is not wrong. It's a very genuine fear, because China has shown repeatedly with other countries that it leverages the economic influence it holds over them and turns this into a geopolitical advantage. It forces the other countries to make geopolitical concessions by threatening them with its economic might. Let's say China shuts off the import of key commodities to India, right? Many key sectors in India will come to a halt. That is the kind of strength and power that China has on the economy of other countries, especially that of India. So this becomes a national security risk as well. When you have such a high degree of import dependency, that too with an aggressive power, which is using its economic leverage for geopolitical gains, right? It could become a national security threat. China can easily destabilize a country, bring its economy to a halt, leading to the collapse of critical sectors, and that's how it becomes a security threat as well, right? Now, which sectors in India have become dependent? That is the next point. Many important sectors like, for example, electronics, automobile, pharmaceuticals, telecom and power equipment, right? And many, many more. I'm just giving you a sample. All right. In these sectors and in many more sectors, we have a critical dependency. See, we say that India is the pharmacy of the world. We are the world's largest producer of generic drugs and vaccines, right? We have a very strong, formidable pharmaceutical industry, right? But did you know that our pharma industry is heavily dependent on China? China provides a core ingredient, a critical ingredient, without which our pharma industry can come to a halt. It can collapse. Almost 60% of our API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is the core product in your drugs, it comes from China. Almost 60% of it. Out of the total APIs which are consumed in India by the pharmaceutical industry, 60% of the API is coming from China. Without this API supply, right, our pharma industry will collapse. That is the critical dependency we have. Same with electronics. We are very weak in semiconductors, right? We are just started out in the semiconductor domain. Now we are looking to ramp up our semiconductor production. But China is already a global leader in terms of manufacturing of electronics, appliances, electronic gadgets. Again, China is the manufacturing powerhouse. And most of the electronic items, appliances, gadgets, semiconductor chips, they're all imported by India. Automobile components, spare parts, which are crucial for the automobile sector in India, comes from China. In the power and telecom sector, the back-end infrastructure, the power transformers, the mobile switching equipment, the telecom switching equipment, right? This is the back end of your infrastructure, of your mobile and internet and your power infrastructure. All of this comes from China. Chinese companies have global domination in the telecom and power sector. Now, all these are critical sectors if you observe, right? Any disruption in these sectors will not only affect our economy, it could have national security consequences. And China has a hold on these sectors of India, right? So there is a disturbing pattern of trade which really concerns and bothers India. In a way, it has become a new form of colonialism, where China is procuring raw materials from India, basic raw materials. Because if you look at our exports to China, most of it is raw materials. We export iron ore and other forest products, and such raw materials are exported from India largely. But we are importing all finished goods and products from China, right? So this is like colonialism, like the British did. They looted the raw materials, produced all the goods, and dumped the goods on the Indian market, thus destroying the Indian economy. China has such an equation with India and many, many other countries. It leverages its manufacturing potential, It produces on mass scale, right? It produces on scale, and it dominates the global supply chains. China has a dominating control over global supply chains. Supply chain is basically the route from factories to your doorstep. The entire life cycle of production of a product, that is a supply chain, right? There are different commodities, raw materials sourced from different parts of the world to make a product, right? And the logistics which is handling this, which is shipping these spare parts and components, delivering it to the required places, this whole infrastructure, the logistical infrastructure through which goods are moving around the world, that is your supply chain. And China dominates the global supply chains. We saw the devastating impact of this during the COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic broke out and China was the first country to go into a major lockdown, it shut off its manufacturing industries, it closed down all the supply chains, and as a result, global supply chains were hit. Across the world, industries came to a halt because China went into a lockdown. That is the critical dependency countries have on China's manufacturing. All right? You might have experienced this. Let's say you went to buy a laptop or a mobile phone. There were delays. The model you want, the design you want weren't available in the market. Let's say you booked a car, right? In the automobile sector, the impact was huge. There was a huge backlog in the case of semiconductor chips and electronic microcontrollers, right? Because of the huge backlog that was created, there were delays of months and years with regard to your car bookings. If you book a car today, you'll get the car maybe 15, 18 months later. That was the backlog created in 2020, 2021, right? This was around the world because there was a critical shortage following the disruption in global supply chains. So that is why countries are right now very hesitant. They want these trade issues to be addressed, and they want to build their own resilient supply chains by moving away from China dependency. Is that clear? India especially is very, very serious about building its own capabilities in the future. And we work closely with like-minded countries such as Japan, Australia, US, European countries. We are working with all of them to create supply chains that are resilient, that are not entirely dependent on just one country like China. Is that clear? So there are many problems we have with the trade equation. There are many concerns that India has raised. For example, China has a very opaque trade policy. All right. It has often breached the WTO norms, and it even resorts to unfair trade practices. It resorts to unfair trade practices which are prohibited by the WTO, the World Trade Organization. In some sectors, your subsidies are capped by WTO. You can't heavily subsidize your agriculture, your industries beyond a point where it affects global competition, right? You need to be more transparent about your pricing mechanisms. You can't resort to unfair trade mechanisms like dumping. You can't dump your goods on another country, right? These practices are prohibited by WTO, but China resorts to them. China gives massive subsidies to its manufacturing industry. All right. See, China has mastered the art of establishing SEZs, special economic zones. From 1970s itself, it opened up its economy and invested in these massive industrial clusters and started producing on scale. Now, when you start producing on scale, what happens is that the cost of production goes down, right? Let's say, for example, you are having an event. Let's say you are organizing a wedding. The food cost per plate, if you invite only, let's say, 50 people, will be higher compared to if you invite 5,000 people. Let's say you contact a caterer, right? You tell the caterer that we are having an event in our family. Please make food for 50 people. He will charge you more per plate for 50 people. He might charge you 300 rupees per plate. If you say that 5,000 people are coming, prepare 5,000 plates of food, he will charge only 200 rupees or 250 rupees. Because his cost of production per plate goes down when you produce something on scale, right? This is the advantage that China is leveraging. It has created the infrastructure needed. It has put in place the policies, the support structure needed, given massive subsidies to its industries, and it is enabling them to produce on mass scale. So in 1980s, 1990s, global manufacturing shifted to China because of all these advantages. Right from Apple to Sony, all the major companies of the world shifted their production, their manufacturing to China. And today, this gives China the leverage, the advantage to control the global economy. All right. So as China can produce at a much cheaper rate than other countries, it gets an unfair advantage and it dumps these goods on the markets of other countries. In economics, you would have studied what is dumping. Dumping is a practice where the commodity is being imported, right? If it is lower than the selling price, the cost of production in your domestic economy, right? If the goods are being just dumped on the market and if our domestic industry can't compete with that, if they can't compete with the cheap imports coming in, this will destroy your domestic industry. Your domestic manufacturer will not be able to compete with the cheap products coming in through imports. Right? If there is that price mismatch between the cost of production here in India and the imported product, if the imported product is still cheaper than what is being produced here, right, that accounts for dumping. And WTO prohibits this practice. You can impose anti-dumping duties to counter this. You can impose anti-dumping duties against it. So China resorts to many such unfair trade practices, which is a concern for India. Now, other problem we have is that China has created many non-tariff barriers for Indian companies and it has restricted access to the Chinese market. It has given us very limited access to its own market. Because see, in some sectors, India does have an advantage. In some sectors, Indian companies are dominant, like textiles, pharmaceuticals, IT and IT services. Right? We are global leaders in some of these areas. But in our strength areas, China has deliberately created trade barriers through its policy restrictions. Right? It has made it difficult for Indian companies to operate in China and to export to China. So we have a limited market access, whereas China has exploited the Indian market, dumped its goods on the Indian market. It has dumped India with cheap imports and captured a large share of the Indian market. Right? So this is a concern for India. That is why the trade deficit is massive. Just look at the graph here. Look at the trade deficit between India and China. Right? The trade deficit is increasing to dangerous levels, approaching $100 billion. So this is a very unhealthy trade relationship, and China could leverage this for a geopolitical advantage. Given that we have border disputes and a strategic competition, right? China could misuse this economic advantage to punish India economically when tensions or disputes are present. That is what scares India. That is what India fears. Apart from that, we have issues with some Chinese companies. Chinese companies like Huawei, ZTE Telecom, and others. They have a global domination in the mobile internet sector. Most of your 2G, 3G, 4G networks, they're all dominated by Chinese equipment. Not just in India, even in Europe, even in US. All right. Huawei is a global leader when it comes to the switching equipment, which is the back end of your telecom infrastructure. And Chinese companies like these have a global presence and global domination. Now, the fear is that these companies are close to Chinese intelligence agencies. Or China is an authoritarian country. It's a communist authoritarian state. It might force the companies to install security backdoors, to create a backdoor access where Chinese intelligence can access these networks to carry out cyber espionage or even to wage a cyber war and bring down your critical infrastructure. Now imagine in our power grids, if the entire backend infrastructure is from Chinese companies, and if China has secretly built a backdoor entry, right, it can hack into our power networks, bring down our power grids, which blacks out the country, and that could become a national security risk. Through cyber warfare, you can have a real world impact. You can destroy infrastructure, you can bring down power grids and your mobile internet connections, spy on the other countries, and even destroy critical infrastructure. This is a major risk that exists for countries. Western countries, especially, have strongly acted against it, and they have prohibited Chinese companies in their 5G networks. Right? So, major competition and conflict has broken out between Western countries and China over 5G networks and emerging technologies, over critical emerging technologies such as AI, robotics, Internet of Things. These are the critical emerging technologies, the technologies of the future. So Western countries, they don't want to depend on China and Chinese companies going forward. Is that clear? So this has led to major concerns. Even India has similar concerns. We fear that our telecom equipment, power equipment is already rigged, where China might have installed security backdoors, which will allow them to hack into our networks and bring down our critical infrastructure. Chinese mobile applications have become a major security risk. Chinese mobile apps like TikTok, PUBG, then WeChat, and many others. I'm sure you know better. There are hundreds of Chinese applications which are widely popular in India and around the world. The fear is that China might be forcing these tech companies to compromise data security. It might be accessing data of our citizens, which is a huge security threat, along with being a breach of your data privacy. That is why India has banned more than 200 mobile apps of Chinese origin. When the Ladakh clashes broke out, India retaliated on national security grounds and blocked and banned more than 200 Chinese apps which were suspicious, which according to India pose a threat to our cybersecurity and data security. So on the grounds of national security, India has banned all these applications. So these are the various issues we face with China with regard to our trade and economic relations. So what is the solution? What can we do going forward? Going forward, we need to become Atmanirbhar. In the key sectors, we have to build self-sufficiency. This is exactly what India is aiming for, right? That's why the Atmanirbhar campaign has been launched, to build self-sufficiency in all critical industries. So we can produce all the key commodities in India itself. So along with focus on Atmanirbharta and self-sufficiency, we're also aligning with like-minded countries to make the supply chains resilient. We are collaborating with US, Japan, Australia, European countries. We have many initiatives that have been launched to make the global supply chains more resilient and more independent from China's domination. With regard to the security risks, we are either banning some Chinese companies in key sectors, or we are conducting thorough checks. Thorough security audits are conducted on electronic items and other critical components that goes into our mobile internet infrastructure, our power grids, right? Before we install them, thorough security audits are conducted to ensure that there is no security backdoor. We are also acting against Chinese investments. If there are any predatory Chinese investments coming into India, if there are any hostile takeovers happening of Indian companies, the government blocks that, right? The government will block that FDI which is coming in, right? If there is any suspicion that this is a hostile move, it's a hostile investment, the government will block that. So all these measures have been taken in the trade and economic domain, and that's why the topic is very, very important. Is that clear? So this essentially brings us to the end of the chapter. I just want to highlight few concluding points, and then we can close this discussion on India-China. See, we have covered so many topics under this relationship. I'm sure you noticed that most of the issues that we have discussed, they're all problematic issues and conflicts. There is barely any friendship left in this relationship. There's barely any element of cooperation left in the relationship. It has become all about conflict, issues, and disputes. And large part of the blame lies with China itself. It is Chinese aggression, it is China's hostility which has affected our relationship. India was honestly pursuing a friendly relationship few years ago. In the first decade of 2000, from 2000 to 2010, right? Vajpayee government and Manmohan Singh government both genuinely invested in a friendly relationship with China. But China started acting against India as we got closer to the US. Even after this, even after China was behaving aggressively, the Modi government still gave China a chance, trusted China, and tried to build a friendly relationship. We held many summits. The Wuhan Informal Summit was held, where Prime Minister Modi met President Xi Jinping to resolve the Doklam issue and also discuss other areas of cooperation. Right? In 2018, we had the Wuhan Informal Summit. Then we organized the Mamlapuram Informal Summit near Chennai, where Xi Jinping came to India, visited India. He was hosted by PM Modi, and a lot of economic initiatives were announced. China promised investments into our infrastructure sector. It promised to assist India in its high-speed rail network, right? So all these deals were taken forward by the Modi government by hoping that China would repair its relationship with India. But it has completely betrayed the commitments. It has broken down the border agreements as well, and now it has become openly aggressive and hostile in the last 3 years. Since 2020, our relations have completely broken down. All right. So the primary reason responsible is the border dispute, which China has unnecessarily escalated. Its military aggression against India, where Indian soldiers were killed, and its rising influence all across the Indo-Pacific, which has become a challenge for Indian influence. Across the Indo-Pacific, China is trying to contain India. It is very, very evident. It's no longer a theory. It is very evident that it's trying to contain India in the Indo-Pacific, right? It's using military methods, economic methods, and geopolitical tactics to box India in and limit our influence in the Indian Ocean, even in South Asia, in our own neighborhood. It's trying to undercut Indian influence, right? Along with that, it has disrupted the rules-based order and threatened basic rights such as freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. This is another major cause for concern. It has even blocked our entry into important organizations such as the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG. The Nuclear Suppliers Group is an export control regime, and India has been seeking its membership. India has been seeking entry into NSG to get involved in global nuclear commerce so that we can also export nuclear technology. We can import nuclear material like uranium, which is in short supply in India. To power our nuclear program, we'll need uranium supplies from other countries, from suppliers like Australia, Kazakhstan, and others, right? We would depend on them for nuclear supplies. And we want to export our technology as well, help other countries in civilian nuclear reactors. And as nuclear energy is clean energy, it will help drive down emissions as well. So India wants to be a part of the global nuclear market, but China is blocking our entry into this group. In NSG, you have 48 countries. It's a 48 member grouping. All the countries are supporting India. 47 countries are supporting India. China is the only one that's blocking our entry. This is purely on geopolitical grounds, nothing else. Because China does not want global recognition for India's nuclear program. And it wants Pakistan to be treated at par with India. So this is unacceptable to other countries. And as a result, China has managed to block our entry into the NSG. All right. For India, this has been a great ambition. Because see, to become a member of NSG, you should have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. But India, as I mentioned in a previous class, has committed to never sign NPT as it is discriminatory. According to Non-Proliferation Treaty, only P5 countries can have nuclear weapons. Only the 5 permanent members of UNSC. Only they can hold on to their nuclear weapons and even develop their weapons program. Right? So only US, China, Russia, UK, France. Only they can have their weapons and even further develop them. Every other country, if they sign NPT, they have to give up their pursuit of nuclear weapons. They have to commit. They have to legally commit that we will never pursue nuclear weapons. If they have a program already going on, they have to shut it down if they sign NPT. So this is blatantly discriminatory, and hence India has said from the beginning, from 1967 itself, we have said that we will never sign Non-Proliferation Treaty. Same with Pakistan, same with Israel. These 3 countries have never signed NPT because they want to keep the option of developing nuclear weapons. Now, you can't join NSG, you can't become a member of NSG without signing NPT. That's a precondition. All right? So when India developed nuclear weapons and tested the nuclear weapons, in a way it was illegal. It was against international law because we weren't signatories to NPT. We had gone against NPT and developed our weapons and tested our weapons. That is why the global community had imposed economic and technological sanctions on India after the Pokhran tests. After the 98 Pokhran tests, US and many other countries, even China, they all got together and imposed economic and technological sanctions on India as we had violated the NPT. NPT is obligatory to everyone, whether you sign it or not, right? Even if you're not a signatory, you still violate NPT if you develop nuclear weapons. So we were targeted with economic and technological sanctions, and we had been treated as a rogue state, as a nuclear pariah state. India, Pakistan were put in the same bracket. But slowly, India's nuclear program started getting global recognition. Starting with 2004, the Manmohan Singh government achieved a remarkable deal with the US. This was the beginning of the transformation of India-US relations, where US recognized our nuclear program and signed the historic Indo-US nuclear deal. This agreement was critical in changing the very face of India in front of the global community. Until then, India-US had a very problematic, hostile relationship until 2001. After 9/11 attacks, we had started collaborating in the field of counterterrorism, in the field of intelligence sharing, defense, and security. By 2004, we further expanded the relationship with the US and we signed the historic nuclear deal that gave us recognition for our nuclear program from the US itself. So under the nuclear deal, US promised India that it will help us join all the export control regimes without signing NPT. The NSG exemption was promised to India. US promised that if American companies are allowed to sell nuclear reactors to India, if American companies get access to our nuclear market, in return, US will promise to get us entry into all export control regimes so we can overcome all the technological sanctions against us. All right. So without signing NPT, we were promised by US that we will get entry to NSG and other export control regimes. And the US has lived up to this promise. The US has helped India to enter all export control regimes. We have become a member of 3 important export control regimes. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to join NSG, even if every country is supporting us, because China is blocking our entry. China wants India to be treated on par with Pakistan. And no country will agree to this because Pakistan is a rogue state in the nuclear domain. It has leaked nuclear secrets and nuclear material. It has sold nuclear technology to other rogue countries like North Korea, Libya, and Iran. Right? So no one will deal with Pakistan in the nuclear domain. No one will give that exemption to Pakistan. China is deliberately using this as an excuse. It's asking Pakistan to be treated on par with India, and it doesn't want our nuclear program to get this recognition. So it's blocking our entry into NSG, because decision at NSG is made by all the countries. The decision is made by consensus. Even if one country does not agree, new member cannot be added. All right, 47 countries are supporting us right now, because US has influenced all of them. Even India has influenced all of them, and all the countries are backing India except for China. Similarly, it is stalling UN reforms, which is being pushed by India. Right? India, Japan, and few others are pushing for reforms of the UN, and they are seeking a permanent seat at Security Council. But China is blocking the UN reforms as it doesn't want to share the UN seat with India. It is using other platforms like the Sanctions Committee, the 1267 Sanctions Committee, to shield Pakistan with regard to its sponsorship of terrorism against India. Because we have used the Sanctions Committee to designate several terrorists as global terrorists. We have tried designating Masood Azhar, but China blocked it for 10 years, from 2009 to 2019. We made multiple attempts to designate Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, but China kept blocking India's efforts. It lifted the block only after Pulwama terror attacks. After Pulwama attacks, a lot of pressure came on China from the other permanent members. Only then it lifted the block, and now Masood Azhar is designated by the Sanctions Committee. But there are other terrorists of Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed that we are pursuing right now. We want all of them to be listed as global terrorists by the Sanctions Committee. There are at least 5 to 6 terrorists more who are hiding in Pakistan, who are supported by Pakistan. We want to list all of them as global terrorists. But again, China is blocking the designation because it is shielding Pakistan, trying to protect Pakistan from the embarrassment. So this is the kind of challenge we are facing at the global level from China, right? So what is India doing to counter this? The last point, what is India doing to counter the Chinese challenge? What measures can we take, right? What initiatives have already been started? This is something you need to understand. I'll give you an overview, and we will keep coming back to this topic in almost every chapter from now onwards. We will later talk about Indian Ocean. We will look at Southeast and East Asia, West Asia. We'll look at our relations with global powers. In all these chapters, in all these classes from now on, right, this discussion will keep coming up. In fact, we've already covered some related topics in previous classes. So I'll give you the overview right now. Now, after the classes end, you need to complete this picture and understand what India is doing to counter the Chinese challenge. All right. So let's look at the overview. And once the classes get completed, you'll get that complete picture. In every class, we would have discussed some strategy of India, some initiative of India, which is helping us counter the Chinese influence. For example, we are also pursuing a series of strategic projects all across the Indo-Pacific. For example, remember we studied the Kaladan project, the IMT Trilateral Highway. We studied our investments in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Bhutan and Myanmar. Right? Similarly, we will study many more projects of India in the Indian Ocean. We'll look at our projects in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, in Mauritius and Seychelles. We'll look at our projects in Central Asia. We'll look at our initiatives in West Asia and as well as in Southeast and East Asia. We will take a look at the Pacific Islands. We'll also take a look at Africa. So you will see what kind of influence India is also projecting and how we are making strategic investments and executing some key projects, especially connectivity projects. So this allows India to stand up to the Chinese influence and counter the Chinese influence. We may not have a global project like China. If China has Belt and Road Initiative, one mega global project costing trillions of dollars, right? We may not have this. India cannot afford this. We can never afford such a global initiative, right? We need to acknowledge the reality as well. If we have to protect our interests truly, right, we can't be over ambitious or overconfident. We have to acknowledge the reality that China is a superior economic power to India. China is a superior military power to India. It's a given reality. Doesn't mean India is any weaker. India is not some weak power. India is also a formidable economic and military power. But compared to India, relatively, China is much, much, much superior. China is in competition with the US. It's already a global power, right? So we are many miles behind China in terms of its economic strength and military strength. So if you try to go into a direct head-on competition with such a powerful country, we will lose. We are the weaker power. This is where we have to be strategic, and that's exactly what India is doing. We know we can't compete with Chinese investments. We can't give loans like China. China gives billions of dollars in loans to others. We can't do that. China is building a massive navy with multiple submarines, naval ships, aircraft carriers, and nuclear submarines. India can't have so many vessels and submarines in our fleet. But what we are doing is we are strategically planning and investing in our economic outreach and our military modernization, which gives us the ability to counter China collectively. We are making these small investments across the region. Instead of one global mega initiative like BRI, we are making smaller projects. We are investing in smaller initiatives across the region to protect our core interests. Right? We have some projects with Vietnam, some investments with Japan, some with Australia, some in the Indian Ocean, some in Central Asia, right? Like this, across the region, we have these various projects going on, various initiatives of India where we are investing, and that collectively gives us the strength to combat the Chinese influence. And also, please understand, India's influence does not come just from our hard power. It actually comes from a mix of hard power and soft power. This is the advantage India has against China. All right? China is all about hard power projection. Even if it tries to use soft power, it does not enjoy that goodwill, that trust factor. The goodwill is missing between China and other countries. Many countries have suspicion about China. They know that China is a very transactional power. It's interested only in its own self-interest, right? If you look at Chinese investments, it has pushed many small countries into a debt burden, right? Many Chinese projects, they benefit only China, not the host country, right? So China's equations are one-sided. It's a one-way relationship. It's like a one-way love affair, right? China takes everything by giving very little to the other country. That is China's equation with the other partner. India is not like that. India treats every other country as an equal partner, and we offer mutually beneficial relationships. Every project, every investment that we make will benefit India and will benefit the other country as well. You will see this going forward. We'll discuss some projects going forward. You will see how our projects are actually generating goodwill for India. All right. I'm not just making this up. You go to any country, let's say you go to an African country, you talk to the people there, you'll get to know how they perceive India, how they perceive China. They look at China as a mighty power, as a transactional country, which is forcing itself on others. They look at India with admiration. They look at India with trust and faith that India will do something positive for them, right? That is the difference. That is the perception that is there on the ground. And this is something you can't buy with money. This is something you can't get with military threats. It comes only with exploiting your civilizational cultural ties and by projecting your soft power and by making such investments which will benefit both the sides by building equal partnerships. So this is where India stands apart, and we do have an advantage over China, right? We may not match China in its economic strength and military strength, but we have soft power, we have cultural influence, and we build equal partnerships. So this is the USP for India. This is what Indian foreign policy will rely on to counter the Chinese influence. That is why we have many dedicated foreign policy doctrines for different regions. We have the Act East policy towards Southeast and East Asia, the Sagar doctrine towards the Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific doctrine towards Indo-Pacific region. We have aligned with like-minded democracies which also have similar issues with China, and we have formed the Quad or the Quadrilateral. Right? We have aligned with US, Japan, and Australia to form the Quadrilateral. We even have a naval exercise, the Malabar exercise. Remember, we were mentioning this yesterday. I told you in 2007, we converted Malabar from bilateral to multilateral exercise and invited Japan, Australia, and Singapore as well. But China was not happy. It reacted against India. It put pressure on India. So we stopped inviting others and we returned Malabar back to bilateral format from 2008. But as China got aggressive again with India, we invited these countries back after repeated border incursions. In 2015, we invited Japan back into Malabar and it became a trilateral exercise. And after the latest Ladakh clashes in 2020, we invited Australia back. And now Malabar is back into a quadrilateral exercise between these four navies. Just a few weeks ago, near the coast of Sydney in Australia, this year's edition of Malabar was held, where India projected its military influence along with US, Japan, and Australia in the South Pacific. Right? We visited many key Australian military bases, conducted major military exercises projecting our influence, which allows us to counter China and establish a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. We also have cultural initiatives like Project Mosum, which is run by the Ministry of Culture along with Ministry of External Affairs. We are trying to revive our ancient maritime links. We are trying to revive the historical cultural linkages that dates back to the ancient times, where India was a leading economy of the Indian Ocean. Right? Through the monsoon trade winds, ships would navigate across Indian Ocean, transporting goods from India to regions around the Indian Ocean. Right? Since historical times, since many centuries, we have been trading with Africa, with Southeast Asia and West Asia through the sea route. We are trying to explore these maritime routes again, revive these ancient maritime routes dependent on the monsoon trade winds, and we are trying to rebuild the close cultural links we have with these countries. So that is Project Mosum. It's a soft power initiative. Is that clear? So you go to West Asia, you go to East Africa or Southeast Asia, or any island country in the Indian Ocean. In every place, you find a historical Indian link. Like, for example, you go to Tanzania, Kenya, right, or even Seychelles, you find Gujarati merchants who are present here from many centuries. You go to, let's say, Mauritius, you find a very strong Indian diaspora. You go to West Asian countries from Bahrain to UAE, we have a very strong Indian community, right? And there are historical trading links coming from many centuries. Same with Southeast Asia. So we are trying to leverage these historical links, rebuild our cultural ties to project our soft power along with projecting our military power and our economic power. So it's a collective effort. It's a collection of all these initiatives that helps India to counter the Chinese dominance in the region. All right. So if you can understand this overview, it's more than enough for now. Once we complete the whole syllabus, you'll get a more detailed picture regarding various projects and initiatives of India and how it is helping us to counter China. All right. So we have already covered some of these initiatives. Going forward, we'll be discussing many more, and this will give you a complete picture about India's approach to China. So this is where I would like to stop the discussion. And economic factors and the geopolitical factors. The Cold War came to an end, right? The Soviet Union had collapsed. So geopolitics in general was shifting. Europe started losing its significance in geopolitics after the end of the Cold War. Because the Cold War rivalry between West and the East was primarily centered around Europe, right? That's where the divisions were very evident. The Cold War rivalries were very evident. As Soviet Union collapsed and Cold War ended, right? These divisions went away, and in geopolitical terms, Europe started losing its significance. Next, the economies of Europe started stagnating, be it Germany, France, Italy, Britain, all the West European democracies, their economies started stagnating in terms of their growth. But in Asia, the Asian powers exploded. There was massive growth in India, in China, and in Southeast Asia, right? And Japan has always been a economic powerhouse of the region. So there was a rise of these Asian powers that shifted the global focus towards the Indo-Pacific. Sanskar is asking, what drives this aggressive behavior of China? What is their motivation? From where does this ideology of expansion comes? I was mentioning this yesterday. Chinese aggression, its motivation, its ideological inspiration, it all comes from Maoist philosophy. Yesterday, we spoke about how PRC was formed, how the People's Republic of China was established in 1949. It was established through a civil war where the Communist Party created a mass armed rebellion by bringing the farmers, the peasants, and workers together and triggering an armed rebellion against the then Chinese government, the Republic of China. They threw out the Republic of China through an armed struggle, and that's how the communists captured power in China. So inherently, the Maoist ideology of Mao Zedong was violent. Mao Zedong insisted that China's ancient glory will be restored under communist rule. He insisted that China's territory will expand like the Chinese empires before. And by restoring the lost glory, China will become a global power. This is what Mao Zedong promoted as part of the communist ideology. So Maoism is inherently a violent extremist ideology. It's a left-wing extremist ideology. And this is what drives China's aggressive behavior even today. China was a very insecure power. It had faced a lot of outside exploitation in 1800s, 1900s. So it has come to believe that the only way to protect its interests is to be aggressive against the others. Even if there is a minor issue, it reacts violently and aggressively against the others because it believes that it has to protect its interests only through violence and aggression. And that comes from the Maoist philosophy. Is that clear? In fact, Xi Jinping, he has encouraged his diplomats. He has encouraged the Chinese diplomats and even the Chinese armed forces to be as aggressive as possible. Under Xi Jinping, you see even more aggression from China, not just in its military policy, but also in its diplomacy. This is referred to as the wolf warrior diplomacy of China. In China, there is a popular movie series called The Wolf Warrior. It's a action movie series where Chinese agents, Chinese diplomats, they are protecting Chinese interests by acting as aggressively as possible. It's a very, very popular movie series in China. So the term is inspired by these movies, the Wolf Warrior movie series. So under Xi Jinping, Chinese diplomats and the armed forces are acting even more aggressively. And this is referred to as wolf warrior diplomacy. Right? Under Xi Jinping, there is a stronger belief that China can protect its interests and become a global power if it is even more aggressive. You can see that aggression in its diplomacy and in its military strategy as well. Deepika is asking, India's dependency on Chinese imports would be important for China's economy also. Then why would China try to disrupt it? See, you're right. Even China would be dependent on the Indian market. But however, in a worst case scenario, let's say India-China trade gets disrupted. The impact will be much more severe on India than China. China has such a diversified global market. It can withstand losing access to the Indian market. But India cannot. We right now don't have enough replacements for Chinese imports to the country. In many sectors, as I told you, the core ingredients, several key components and spare parts, they all come from China. Our domestic manufacturing can take a massive hit without Chinese imports. But China can still thrive and survive without even depending on India. It has such a diversified global economy, right? So in a worst case scenario, when there are tensions and conflicts, China can deliver more economic hit to India than what India can do to China. So that is why we are at a disadvantage. Next, Kamlesh is asking, sir, what can we do about the stapled visa issue? How can we counter the stapled visa issue? Can we try issuing different kinds of visas to some Chinese citizens from Tibet or Taiwan or such parts? See, the practice of stapled visas has been rejected by India. We have diplomatically protested against it, put diplomatic pressure against China. But if India were to do the same, let's say, as Kamlesh is suggesting, even we issue stapled visas to Tibetans, or let's say to someone from Taiwan, that would be highly problematic for India itself. Because China is so aggressive, it's going to retaliate for these measures. And the point is, can India withstand the impact? All right. And moreover, we have no claim over Tibet or Taiwan. Right. So issuing stapled visa will not make sense. It means we are making a territorial claim. Right. And it doesn't make sense for India. So the retaliation would be very severe from China, and India has been wary of that. That's why we don't meddle in China's internal matters. We have not meddled in Taiwan. We have not meddled in Hong Kong. Even in Tibet, we have reduced our interference. Even we have asked the government in exile to tone down its activities in India. In the last 20 years, we have not allowed Tibetan activists to protest in India. We have clamped down on the activities of the Tibetan protesters and activists, and we have reduced the activities of the Tibetan government in exile. Because Indian governments are wary, because we are a weaker power compared to China, and China can retaliate, that can have a huge impact on India. So we don't want to trigger China unnecessarily. Next, Smita is asking why China has UNSC P5 membership, but India doesn't. That's because when UN was established in 1945, the major powers from different regions were offered the UN seat, like US from North America, UK and France from Europe, Russia from the Eurasia region, and China was the most dominant power at that time in the Asia region, right? So China was offered that seat, not India. Of course, there are many reports that say India was also offered the seat, but again, it's very disputable, it's debatable. Let's not get into that, it's very political as well. But China was the one which was offered the seat, as it was the large Asian power at that point. Neha is asking why China sometimes threatens Australia. That's because Australia is an American ally, right? It's a Western democracy. So they have few strategic and ideological issues. And China acts very aggressively against Australia as well. Even Australia has a lot of economic dependency on China, and China is misusing the economic dependency to punish Australia. So tensions have come up between these two countries as well. Kishan is asking why not Western countries sideline China in NSG, as like India adopting SAARC minus Pakistan. See, again, the Western powers, right, they are concerned about the Chinese reaction as well. Even they have dependencies on China, like US, for example. The US economy has a dependency. US depends on Chinese imports, just like India. China makes a lot of investments in the US, and China is the biggest holder of the US dollar. In its forex reserves, China holds massive quantities of US dollars through which it can potentially destabilize the American economy, right? So even Western countries are a little cautious when it comes to this approach. And sidelining China at NSG wouldn't serve the purpose, right? You can't remove China as an NSG member. That can't be, I mean, that provision is not available. And NSG membership being denied to India is not a major concern for Western countries. They wouldn't support India to that an extent where they will create problems with China. They wouldn't take that risk of affecting their ties with China. So on the NSG issue of India, they will not sideline China for India. They will not do that. They're supporting our membership. That is different. But they'll not act against China because of that. Surya is asking, sir, what about the necklace of diamond policy? The so-called diamond necklace policy or the iron curtain policy is exactly the same, which I mentioned. We discussed the counter strategy of India, right? We spoke about various strategic projects of India across the region. These projects collectively are referred to as the iron curtain of India or sometimes the diamond necklace of India. This is an informal term. Government does not use the term. It's media and some think tanks which use the term. They say if China has string of pearls to encircle India, we are countering that with a diamond necklace. That is with series of our own projects across Indian Ocean to counter the string of pearls. Right? So it's also called the iron curtain of India as well. These are informal terminologies. So it's something we've already covered. Just the name is different. There is an informal name given in the media, but it's not an official term used by India. Thing you can do is to get into a conflict. Now you take Southeast Asian countries, right? Vietnam, be it Philippines or Indonesia, Brunei, Malaysia. None of them have the ability to take on China in the military domain. In fact, even they have critical economic dependency on China. China can punish them very severely. Apart from diplomatic measures, right? Every other option is not viable for these small countries. Even for Japan, right? Even for Japan, Japan is hesitant because China has a much more formidable armed force compared to Japan. Apart from diplomatic and some economic measures and a military deterrence, they can't get aggressive against China in the military domain. So that's why no country can act against China with regard to the maritime disputes. And global platforms like UN have been ineffective. The UN is an outdated organization, right, which is not effective in penalizing such violations of international law. And also, this is the advantage of being a global power. Even US has gotten away with many violations just because it's a global power, right? This is how geopolitics works. The one who is powerful, they can commit these violations and get away with it with minimal punishment or zero punishment. But small countries, they will be punished for any violations. Like Myanmar, right? Myanmar has committed violations. It's been punished with sanctions. North Korea, Iran, or Sri Lanka as well. Small countries are targeted. They are easily punishable. But big powers which control all the key international institutions, they will never allow the global community to punish them or target them. This is one challenge we've always been dealing with in geopolitics. The big powers get away with all these violations. All right. So guys, these are the questions. Now let's start with the next module. Let's get started with the Indian Ocean region. This is another interesting chapter because we are focusing on a very vibrant region, that is Indian Ocean. So first, I would like to have a general discussion on the Indian Ocean region. We'll understand our interests, our priorities, our policy approach towards Indian Ocean, and then we'll take up some important island countries and study our relations with them. So in this chapter, India-Sri Lanka relations will be the most important. All right. So we will look at our ties with Sri Lanka. We'll study this in detail as it's a neighboring country as well. It's a South Asian country along with being an Indian Ocean island nation. We'll also look at our ties with Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. We'll briefly examine our ties with these important island countries. The Indian Ocean has always been the strategic backyard of India. Historically, India has been the dominant influence in the Indian Ocean since ancient times, medieval times, right? Various Indian empires and kingdoms, they have dominated the trade routes all across the Indian Ocean, be it the trade route via Arabian Sea to the Gulf, or be it the trade route to Southeast Asia and beyond through Bay of Bengal and South China Sea, be it influence towards East Africa, or even towards the southern parts of the Indian Ocean, right? Across this region, various Indian empires and kingdoms have had a strong trading cultural relationship. So historically as well, and traditionally, India has been a dominant power and influence. Indian traders, Indian merchants, they've reached out to all these nooks and corners of the Indian Ocean since centuries. So, post independence, we have continued to prioritize the Indian Ocean as it is directly linked to the economic stability of India and also to the security of India. India's destiny is tied to the Indian Ocean, right? In today's globalized world, having sea access is the most critical component for a country, right? It's a geographical blessing, it's a geographical advantage. India is blessed with a massive coastline of around 7,500 kilometers from Gujarat to West Bengal. We have a huge coastline that gives us tremendous economic and trading opportunities. We have several major ports along this coastline, which is the lifeline of our economy. This is how we serve the global markets. This is how we send our exports. This is where we receive our imports as well, right? Which is crucial for our economy also. And we have important island territories, that is Andaman Nicobar and the Lakshadweep Islands. So the presence of these island territories, which are located a little away from mainland India, gives us a strategic position in the Indian Ocean. See, this is the coastline of India, right? This is the Indian subcontinent, the mainland of India. And we have these island territories over here, the Andaman Nicobar Islands in Bay of Bengal and the Lakshadweep Islands in Arabian Sea. So they are located quite far away from the mainland, and it further increases our reach and influence through which we can project our influence across the Indian Ocean. Our economic stability, our national security is tied to the Indian Ocean. So that is why, since independence, Indian governments have always prioritized the Indian Ocean, and we have seen the Indian Ocean as our own backyard. Just like in every house, there will be a backyard where you have dominating influence. Similarly, India sees Indian Ocean as our backyard. So we don't want any external power to meddle or interfere or threaten in the Indian Ocean, right? In our backyards as well, we don't want our neighbors or someone from a different locality to come to our backyard and threaten us. No one would like that. Similarly, India treats Indian Ocean as our own backyard, where we should be the dominant influence. We want to limit external interference across the Indian Ocean and retain our strategic position in the Indian Ocean. This has been our priority in our foreign policy. So subsequent governments, they've all cultivated very strong ties with the Indian Ocean countries, from West Asia to East Africa to Southeast Asia and the island countries. With all of them, we have built very strong and cordial relations since many, many decades. Understood? Because our well-being is directly tied to this water body. In fact, the ocean is named after India, the Indian Ocean, right? So our destiny, our stability, everything is related to the Indian Ocean. So here in the map, you can see the choke points that have been marked and highlighted, because there are some concerns in the Indian Ocean which poses a challenge for India. There are multiple choke points which threatens our economic stability and security. We've already studied them, but I want you guys to take a look again. You have the Hormuz Strait here, which is critical for oil supplies to India. The oil and gas supplies from Persian Gulf, from all the Gulf countries, passes through the narrow Hormuz Strait and reaches India. The strategic Malacca Strait between Singapore and Indonesia, it is again vital for our trade, which passes through the Indo-Pacific. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait over here between Djibouti and Yemen, right? It connects the Gulf of Aden with the Red Sea. This is crucial for our trade with Europe to reach the Atlantic. This is the preferred route. It's the most important shipping lane that connects Europe with Asia, and India is heavily dependent on it. We have a lot of exports headed towards Europe and this region, and we also have a lot of imports coming in. So this is another narrow choke point. Then you can also see the Mozambique Channel over here between Mozambique, which is an East African country, and Madagascar, which is an Indian Ocean island nation. So between the two, you have the Mozambique Channel, which is another important shipping lane. And during colonial times, it was a very important shipping lane because this was the shipping route. Before the Suez Canal was built here in Egypt, before the Suez Canal was created, that formed a shorter route from the Mediterranean to Red Sea, right? This was the shipping route from India to Europe. Even today, Mozambique Channel remains a vital shipping lane to connect with Southern and Western Africa, to connect with Latin America. So we have major interests across this region. And don't forget, Madagascar is geographically tied to India. I hope you know that, right? The Palghat Gap or the Palakkad Gap in Kerala is a physical representation of our ties with Madagascar. Our historical, geographical, physical connection with Madagascar can be seen at the Palakkad Gap. All right? Because this is a part of the Indian subcontinent which joined us with Africa many, many millions of years ago. So as the continents drifted apart due to tectonic plate movement, Madagascar broke away from the Indian subcontinent, right? Even today, you find that the geography, the climate is very, very similar. What you find in Western Ghats of India, you find the exact same in Madagascar. From the soil to the vegetation, the species, it's pretty much the same, right? Palakkad Gap represents that breakaway of Madagascar from India. So we have that deep-rooted link, be it geographical, historical, or cultural. There is a deep-rooted link India has with all these regions, right? Plus, there are many external powers interested in the Indian Ocean. It is such a crucial water body that foreign powers will be interested. They will keep exerting their influence. So we should be able to counter that and protect our interests. The United States is a major influence here as it has a military base at Diogo Garcia. This small island you are seeing here below Maldives, this is a British Indian Ocean territory. Britain never decolonized this island. It's part of the Chagos group of island, which should actually belong to Mauritius. Ideally, Mauritius should have gotten control of all the Chagos group of islands, including Diogo Garcia. But the British, after the Second World War, they did not decolonize these islands because of its strategic location. They kept it for themselves. Even today, it's a British territory. But after the World War, they leased it to the US. And since then, the US has established a major naval military base over here. It's a staging ground for all American naval military operations across the Indian Ocean. All right, this is where the 7th Naval Fleet was dispatched to threaten India during the 1971 war. Right now, things are different. US is a close ally for us. US is not a threat, but US does have a significant military presence. The region is affected by terrorism, piracy, and organized crime. They're all very rampant across this region. From Pakistan to Iran, from Yemen to Somalia, and all the way to East Africa. This whole region you're seeing here, right? It's a hub of many extremist organizations. Yemen is going through a civil war led by the Houthi rebels against the Yemeni government. Iran is known to sponsor many radical extremist outfits, including the Houthi rebels of Yemen. Right? Even Saudi Arabia and others, they do sponsor a few extremist outfits in the region. Pakistan is the fountainhead of terrorism. Right? It's the prime sponsor of all kinds of terror activities. Across East Africa, from Somalia to Mozambique, there are many radical outfits. In Somalia, you have Al-Shabaab, a dangerous terror group that has controlled most of Somalia since 30 years. And it is this terror group which carries out or promotes Somalian piracy. near this Horn of Africa region. See, this is your Horn of Africa region, which looks like a horn of the rhinoceros. This part of East Africa is the Horn of Africa. So Somalia has been completely destabilized from 3 decades by this terrorist group called Al-Shabaab. It's aligned with Al-Qaeda, and it sponsors the pirates, the Somalian pirates, to target the ships. So commercial ships are hijacked constantly near Gulf of Aden and Horn of Africa, and it threatens the shipping and the movement of ships in this region. They hijack the ships, hold them to ransom, and extort money from the owners. So this has become a major threat for shipping in the region. And organized crime, especially drug trafficking and arms smuggling, is very rampant across this part of the Indian Ocean. Right? Pakistan is involved in it. From Afghanistan and Iran, a lot of drugs are smuggled through the route. Many criminal cartels backed by Pakistan, they push the drugs and arms across this region, which is further exported to other countries or trafficked to other countries. So the presence of so many criminal activities, terror and extremist groups, and piracy remains a security threat for India and others. Is that clear? We have seen a rise of extremism in Sri Lanka and Maldives as well. So all these security threats, they do bother India. That is why in Djibouti, many foreign navies have a military base. US, few European powers, and even Japan, and of course, China as well. Right? I was mentioning this yesterday, that China has a military base, a foreign military base at Djibouti. So all these countries have a military presence in Djibouti through which they project their naval power, and it means there is external foreign military presence here. Right? You can also see the Cocos or Keeling Island and Christmas Island of Australia. Australia is a major Indian Ocean power. Right? Australia has military facilities at the Cocos and Christmas Island. And I'm mentioning this because recently, when we participated in the Malabar exercise near Sydney, Indian aircraft and vessels, they visited Cocos and Christmas Island. That shows the growing defense relations as well between India and Australia, and how we use the strategic islands to project military influence. Then do you know that even France is an Indian Ocean power? Just like Britain, France also has several overseas territories, such as the French Reunion over here, or La Reunion. Between Madagascar and Mauritius, there is a small island called La Reunion. It's French territory. Apart from that, France has many more territories across Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. So France also has a major military presence, and even France is a major military power in the region. But the biggest concern for us is the rising presence and influence of China. The Chinese Navy has expanded its presence and influence all across Indian Ocean. Chinese naval ships and submarines, and even Chinese spy vessels, they constantly visit the Indian Ocean, dock at key ports. They pose a common threat to India, US, and all the other countries in the region. China has also stepped up its diplomatic influence. It has executed key strategic projects, as we studied under Belt and Road Initiative and String of Pearls theory. Right? From East Africa to West Asia to South Asia to Southeast Asia, China controls many key facilities and key projects, and as a result, it has become a major power in the Indian Ocean. So this is the challenge India faces. There are so many external powers which are exercising their influence. There are so many security threats. Which causes instability in Indian Ocean and some of these Indian Ocean countries. So we have to navigate all these challenges and protect India's core interests. This is the challenge for us in our foreign policy. If you look at Indian Ocean, there are tremendous opportunities for India. At the same time, there are major challenges that arise from Indian Ocean. Dealing with terrorism, dealing with organized crime, countering the influence of external militaries, external powers, especially that of China, right? Promoting the economic relations, protecting the marine environment. All these are major focus areas for India. Understood? I can give you some examples to show the security threats. Recently, massive drug consignments have been seized by Indian authorities in the Arabian Sea. These drug consignments, they come from Afghanistan via Iran. They are pushed by Pakistani drug cartels, Afghan and Pakistani drug cartels, and they are tied to Pakistan's ISI and the terror groups operating here. These drug consignments, they have come to Indian ports as well, like the Mundra port in Gujarat. And in the Arabian Sea as well, our Coast Guard and Navy have intercepted many boats and ships and confiscated large quantities of drugs, along with arms and weapons. These drugs, arms, and weapons, right, they directly drive terrorism as well. We have seen links between the drug cartels of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and LTTE of Sri Lanka. Recently, just last year, we have come across evidence to show that LTTE is reviving. They're also attempting to revive LTTE, and it's connecting with some criminal groups and terror groups to raise funds through drug trafficking. It's trying to procure arms and weapons as well. So these are disturbing trends, right? These trends definitely pose a risk and threat for India. So that is why the Indian Ocean becomes a top priority for us in our foreign policy. So to secure these interests, we have a streamlined approach today. I told you that since 1947, Indian Ocean has been a priority for all the governments, right? We have focused on all these countries. We have had very good relations with most of them. We have had very good defense and security relations. We have had a extensive military presence as well across the region and close diplomatic cultural ties as well. Now, this approach of India towards Indian Ocean has been streamlined into one foreign policy doctrine called the Sagar Doctrine, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2015. In 2015, PM Modi was traveling to few Indian Ocean countries. He was visiting Mauritius and Seychelles to inaugurate some key projects. Key security projects were being inaugurated in Mauritius and Seychelles. During this important visit, PM Modi launched a dedicated foreign policy doctrine of India towards Indian Ocean called the Sagar Doctrine. Sagar not only refers to the seas and the oceans, right? It's a Sanskrit Hindi word for seas and oceans. It also is an acronym. It expands. It expands and it stands for security and growth for all in the region. Security and growth for all in the region. So this expansion tells you everything about the doctrine and everything about India's approach. Just by looking at the expansion of Sagar, right? You can understand everything about India's approach towards Indian Ocean. Through Sagar Doctrine, we are promising, we are guaranteeing the security for all the countries. Security of not just India, but other countries as well, especially the island countries of Indian Ocean. And we are promising growth opportunities for all of them. All right. So when I say security, obviously it refers to maritime security, because Indian Ocean clearly has a maritime character to it. So we are guaranteeing maritime security to most of the countries here to deal with security threats like terrorism, piracy, organized crime. If they face any security challenges, right, India is always there to help them. We have done it many times before as well. So we are promising defense and security to stabilize the countries and counter all the threats. Since they are island nations, they'll have large exclusive economic zones, which they are not able to protect and defend on themselves, right? They may not have strong militaries like India. So we help them, we assist them in maritime surveillance. We assist them in safeguarding their exclusive economic zones. We assist other countries, we work with other countries to protect the shipping lanes and to ensure the choke points are not blocked. Right? We collaborate with US, Japan, European navies to ensure that Bab el-Mandeb, Hormuz, Mozambique Channel, Malacca, and all these straits, these choke points are free from any tensions and blockades because it is crucial for the economy and the security of the region. Right? This is what we promise under maritime security. We promise protection of exclusive economic zones, assistance in maritime surveillance, safeguarding the choke points. So these are the security offerings of India under the Sagar Doctrine, right? We are helping them deal with any threat posed by terrorism or organized crime or piracy. We conduct anti-piracy patrols in Gulf of Aden and near Horn of Africa to tackle the pirates. We collaborate with foreign navies for these anti-piracy missions. We target drug traffickers and arms traffickers, right? Indian agencies, Indian forces, they play a critical role in this. And we counter terrorism and radicalism as well. So this is the security we are promising. And we are promising growth, economic growth through investments, through Indian projects, by connecting these countries with the Indian economy, by interlinking our ports, by establishing better maritime connectivity. Right? This is the priority of our Sagar Doctrine. All right, security and growth for all in the region. So our vision is to emerge as the net security provider for the Indian Ocean. By guaranteeing security and growth for all the countries, we want to emerge as the net security provider. Meaning, if they face any security threats, or if they face any kind of challenges which threatens their stability, India will be ready to offer assistance to these countries. All right? Not just any kind of ordinary assistance. We want to be the first responder for any crisis situation in the Indian Ocean. This is a vision of Sagar Doctrine, to come out as the net security provider. Now, let me give you more clarity on this by taking some examples. Let's say Sri Lanka faces an economic crisis. It's a threat to its economy and to the stability of the country. India will be the first to respond and help Sri Lanka by providing economic assistance. Let's say Maldives faces a major security threat. In fact, it did once in 1988. In 1988, the friendly government in Maldives was threatened by a Tamil militant group called PLOTE. This Tamil militant group from Sri Lanka planned a coup attempt. It wanted to attack Malé, the capital of Maldives, and throw out the government of Maldives and capture power in Maldives. When this security threat emerged in 1988, the then Maldives president, Abdul Gayoom, Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, a good friend of India, he reached out to India asking for help. Immediately, the then government of India, the Rajiv Gandhi government, launched Operation Cactus, which is one of India's legendary foreign military operations. Within hours, Indian special forces, Indian commandos, the para commandos were mobilized by the Indian Army, and even the Indian Navy and Indian Air Force were deployed. It was a tri-service operation, and we managed to protect Maldives and the government from this militant attack. So that is a classic example of India being the first responder during any crisis and providing any possible assistance to these friendly countries. The economic crisis that Sri Lanka has seen from last year, right? Who's the biggest assistance provider to Sri Lanka? It is India. We have given almost $4 billion worth of economic assistance, right? The region is prone to disasters, right? The region is affected by tsunamis, cyclones. It's affected by rising sea levels because of climate change and global warming. In the case of any disaster, India is the first responder. We provide HADR assistance. We help them in disaster management. We have become a leader in HADR operations, and we assist all the countries in disaster management. If you look at the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that had hit not just India but many Indian Ocean countries, right? India responded, even though we ourselves were affected very badly. More than 1 lakh people were killed in India, in Tamil Nadu and in Andaman Nicobar. But still, we sent out the Indian Navy to Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Maldives and gave assistance to these countries as well. We have done it repeatedly. Now, if you look at east coast of Africa, if you look at Mozambique, Kenya, and Tanzania, they are hit by tropical cyclones. In the last 3-4 years itself, there have been multiple cyclones which have caused devastation in Mozambique. Every time Indian Navy has been dispatched to provide HADR assistance. Mauritius witnessed an oil spill disaster a few months ago. A ship had grounded, causing leakage of the oil, and a major environmental disaster was happening. It was India which responded and helped Mauritius in containing the oil spill. Right? So we have been doing this from many years. Now the approach has been streamlined into Sagar Doctrine, through which we are becoming the net security provider of the region. We'll guarantee any kind of security, be it military assistance, economic assistance, or any other support needed. If the country is facing a crisis, India is there to help them, to assist them. This is the focus, the approach of India to protect our interests in the Indian Ocean. It ensures that the countries will first reach out to India. They'll be confident that India will help them out. They need not ask US or China for help. They'll come to India for help, which is the regional power. The other priority we have is the implementation of the blue economy, ocean economy model. All right. This is a sustainable, inclusive development model, which is being promoted even by the United Nations, the World Bank, and all the global institutions. It's a trending model of development for coastal countries, for coastal states. It's a sustainable and inclusive model of economic development for coastal countries, which is being promoted by UN, World Bank, and other key institutions. So India has prioritized the implementation of the blue economy model. We are assisting all the countries in implementing the blue economy model. We are working through some international groupings and regional groupings as well. In the Indian Ocean, there are some important groupings. We'll study this in the next class. There are some important organizations based out of the Indian Ocean. Even at these groupings, we are promoting the blue economy model. So the blue economy model is defined by 2 principles. The first principle is that marine and coastal resources have to be sustainably exploited. Sustainable exploitation is the first mantra. Sustainable exploitation of marine resources by causing minimal damage to the environment, by not over-exploiting. That is the first pillar of blue economy model. Right? So countries will implement such a model of development where they rely on marine and coastal resources. It is crucial to drive your economic growth. But we will not over-exploit. We will not harm the coastal and marine environment and biodiversity. So this approach is the first pillar of blue economy or ocean economy model. Second is an inclusive approach where the coastal communities will get the benefits of exploitation. The benefits of growth, the benefits of exploitation will be primarily channeled towards the upliftment of coastal communities. So this is an inclusive approach. All right. So it's a sustainable, inclusive model of growth and development for coastal countries that's being promoted around the world. India also has prioritized this for our own economic growth, and we are helping other countries in the Indian Ocean to implement this model. We are promoting this model through important groupings of the Indian Ocean as well, right? Because coastal communities are very vulnerable. They are at risk. They are the most affected by global warming and climate change, which has driven more extreme weather events like cyclones and other disasters. Right? Global warming has accelerated the melting of ice, leading to rising sea levels, which can submerge many island countries in the future, especially low-lying island nations like Maldives, many islands of Seychelles and Mauritius. They may not exist by the end of this century. Some of the low-lying small islands, they'll get completely submerged. So they are at the biggest risk. These coastal communities, the fishing communities, the coastal villages, they are the most vulnerable to the impact of disasters like cyclones and tsunamis and extreme weather events. Right? The negative impact of climate change and global warming will be felt by these island countries and coastal communities. So the benefits of development, benefits of exploitation should be channeled to the coastal communities to develop them and to make them resilient against disasters. This is the focus of blue economy model. All right. We are prioritizing this approach in our Sagar doctrine, in our Indian Ocean approach. So if you're able to understand and remember these points that I've discussed, it will not only cover the Indian Ocean, it will help you to cover all the countries and bilateral relations as well. So what we are going to discuss after this will become very easy and simple if you understood what we have covered right now. Understood? So let's move on. Let's look at the first country. We'll pick up Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka deserves more attention as it's an important neighbor of India, a South Asian country and an Indian Ocean country. So let's focus on Sri Lanka today. We have another 1 hour to go. We'll try to cover as much as possible. In the next class, we'll wrap it up by looking at the other island nations as well. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, the first thing that comes to mind is that we share historical, civilizational, cultural ties with this country. Sri Lanka in the past was referred to as Ceylon, right? It was just referred to as Lanka as well in ancient Indian context. And it has very much been part of the same Indian civilization. Today, these territories might be different countries. They've come up as different nation states in modern times. But historically, all these areas, right, from Afghanistan till Sri Lanka to Myanmar, they were all part of one thriving, progressive civilization, that is the Indian civilization. So culturally, we are pretty much the same, be it religion, food, customs, practices, right? They're all very, very similar. The strongest influence that binds India, Sri Lanka is the religious influence, the religious connect. Hinduism and Buddhism form the strongest connection because if you look at various empires and kingdoms like Cholas, the kingdom of Travancore, which ruled and dominated southern India, that is today's Kerala and Tamil Nadu, they all had strong influence in Sri Lanka and even in Maldives and beyond that, right? If you look at our epics, our mythological texts like Ramayana, even Mahabharata, they all make strong references to Sri Lanka. Ramayana is largely based out of Sri Lanka, right? Buddhism would travel from India and take root in Sri Lanka. And today, Sri Lanka is a Buddhist majority country. Just like Bhutan and Myanmar, Sri Lanka is a Buddhist majority nation. Now, this is quite interesting, right? Amongst all our neighbors, 3 of them are Buddhist majority countries: Bhutan, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. So there is a deep-rooted historical connection that exists here. That's why we tap these cultural links. We have major soft power diplomatic initiatives like the Ramayana Trail. You might have heard about this initiative of India. We are creating a Ramayana Trail to connect all these pilgrimage sites, these Hindu pilgrimage sites that are scattered across India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. We want to make this a tourist trail where tourists, specifically Hindu pilgrims, can cover all these pilgrimage sites connected with Ramayana, right? They are present in Sri Lanka, in India, and Nepal. So this is a major cultural initiative being driven by the Modi government. Similarly, we have the Buddhist Circuit Initiative, which we have been studying from the first class. The Buddhist Circuit, which we are creating with Nepal, and Sri Lanka is obviously a focus country for this project. We are improving the tourist facilities and connectivity for sacred Buddhist sites. And Sri Lanka is definitely one of the focus countries of the Buddhist Circuit Initiative. For example, we recently inaugurated the Kushinagar International Airport at Uttar Pradesh. Have you heard of Kushinagar? It's an important Buddhist pilgrimage site. So when this airport was inaugurated by the government of India and the UP government, we had invited Sri Lankan leaders to participate in the inauguration. All right. The Rajapaksa brothers who were in power a few years ago, right? They and their family members, they were invited for the inauguration ceremony of Kushinagar Airport in UP. What does it signify? It signifies that we are exploring our Buddhist connections. We invited Sri Lankan leaders to show that this is part of Buddhist Circuit Initiative. The airport is meant to help Buddhist pilgrims from around the world, especially around Asia, to come to UP, to come to Kushinagar and pay their respects at Buddhist sites. Similarly, we have many projects going on at Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, and other important historical sites, which is connected to Buddhism. Right? We want to create a circuit with Nepal and Sri Lanka to form strong cultural bonds so that we can leverage our civilizational ties with these neighboring countries. So, with such a country where we have deep-rooted cultural historical links, it would be easier to build stronger diplomatic relations as well. Right? So, naturally, Sri Lanka is a close partner for India, a very important friend. And given its location in the Indian Ocean, it becomes all the more important for India. If you look at the whole map of Indian Ocean, if you go back, you'll see that Sri Lanka is at the center, at the very heart of the Indian Ocean. And the best part is that even though it's a small country, it has important ports, strategic ports, which are vital for global shipping, especially the Colombo port. The Colombo port has some of the advanced infrastructure, which is comparable with Singapore or the other well-known ports in UAE, like Dubai, like Singapore. Colombo is a major port facility for the entire region. International shipping networks, they prefer Colombo port to dock, to get servicing done, to resupplies, to get refueling and resupplies. Colombo is a preferred destination. Lot of India's trade, lot of India's exports and imports pass through Colombo port of Sri Lanka. All right. Apart from Colombo port, Sri Lanka has many other important port facilities like Hambantota port, Trincomalee port, Kanke Senturai. Some of these ports are built by India. Some of these ports are built by China. So you see that India-China competition in these strategic port projects of Sri Lanka, which further increases the importance and profile of Sri Lanka for India. So India has cultivated close, friendly, and strong relations with Sri Lanka. But however, there is a bitter history which is part of our relationship. There is a story of human tragedy involving India and Sri Lanka, and it's related to what happened with Tamil minorities in the country. So we'll begin the discussion by focusing on the deep-rooted ethnic divide in Sri Lanka, which has divided the country and broken the country. Sri Lanka has suffered grave horrors in the past, and it continues to see the divisions present even today. This has to do with the demography of Sri Lanka. Again, you can see how geography influences geopolitics. Its location in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka being an island country, the presence of these ports, and its human geography, the different ethnic groups that are present, the different religions that are present. These factors, which are geographical factors, physical and human geographical factors, they are directly influencing the international relations of Sri Lanka. So understanding this is geopolitics. And you can alter these geographical factors to engage in geopolitics, to play geopolitics, to protect your interests. Right? So in the country, there is a very strong, deep-rooted ethnic divide between the majority ethnic group, the Sinhala majority, the Sinhalas or the Sinhalese. They are the ethnic majority in Sri Lanka. Majority of Sri Lankans are Sinhalese, and Sinhalese are Buddhists. That's why Sri Lanka is a Buddhist majority country. Is that clear? So there is a ethno-communal angle here. Along with ethnicity being a dividing factor, the communal angle is also a dividing factor. So majority community in Sri Lanka are the Sinhalese or the Sinhalas, and they're all Buddhists. The most important minority in Sri Lanka are the Tamil minorities, who speak the Tamil language, who are part of the Tamil culture, right, from southern India. So Tamil minorities, they could be Hindus, some are Christians and Muslims as well, and there are a few Buddhists as well. So if you look at the religious profile of Tamil minorities, it is slightly divided. But the Tamil identity, the ethnic identity, the linguistic and cultural identity is what binds the Tamils together, right? So there has been a historical divide between the Sinhala Buddhists and the Tamils. Now look at the map here. I've shared two important maps that shows the demography of Sri Lanka. Initially, at first glance, they might look similar to you, but they're not. The map here shows the ethnic profile of Sri Lanka. The other map shows the religious profile of Sri Lanka. It looks the same because the majority ethnic group, the Sinhalese, they are all Buddhists. That's why both maps are looking similar. So this is where you find the Sinhalese. All these areas shaded in purple, right? That's where you find the Sinhala Buddhists. You can see how they are the majority community, right? Found all across the country. The Tamil minorities, on the other hand, they are concentrated in certain parts of Sri Lanka. Can you see this region, the northern province? The northern province of Sri Lanka. This is where you have the Jaffna Peninsula. This is the Jaffna Peninsula, which is very close to the coastline of Tamil Nadu. From Rameshwaram, you can see Jaffna. If you have been to Rameshwaram, right, you can see Sri Lanka on the other side. It's that close. So this is the Jaffna region, which is very, very close to Tamil Nadu. We share very close, deep-rooted links with this region, and this is the northern province. Then this here is the eastern province. This is where you find most of the Tamil minorities of the country. The Tamils found here, they are often referred to as the Sri Lankan Tamils. They represent a distinct category of Tamils in the country. Tamils found in northern and eastern provinces. They moved here centuries ago through natural migration, and they had well integrated with the Sri Lankan society. There was harmony between Sinhala Buddhists and the Tamils, right? Because these Tamils came centuries ago, from many, many centuries as part of the common Indian civilization from southern parts of India, from today's Tamil Nadu and the Tamil inhabited areas. Tamils had migrated, settled in northern and eastern provinces, and they had merged with the Sri Lankan society. Sinhala Buddhists had no issues with them, and they even had a lot of harmony between them. But then came another batch of Tamils more recently under British rule, and they are called Indian Tamils. They were transported here by the British as part of the oppressive indentured labor system. See, the British had colonies around the world, correct? From Caribbean to Pacific Islands to Africa to India. So they had many enterprises. They had plantation crops, factories, right? They had many projects where mines and other resources were being exploited. To run all these enterprises, the British needed cheap labor. In 1800s, slavery was abolished by the British Parliament. Until then, the British companies like East India Company, they relied on African slaves. They abused African slaves, they dehumanized them, committed brutal racial atrocities against the Africans, right? African slaves were treated as commodities, as products. They would sell and buy African slaves. They would own African slaves. This is how they treated the Africans. After centuries of abusing the African slaves under the slavery system, finally there was some awakening in Britain that led the British Parliament to abolish slavery. So this was done in early 1800s. So without slavery, British enterprises could not survive. Now they had to replace the African slaves with some cheap labor. And they found that in India. They would deceive many Indians. They would lie to them, make false promises to them. Or sometimes they would forcefully transport Indian workers and their families and dump them on these faraway island countries. From Mauritius to Sri Lanka, to West Indies, to South America, to South Pacific, like Fiji, right? Across these British colonies, you find a strong Indian community today. It's because their ancestors were transported from India as part of this brutal, oppressive, indentured labor system. You would have noticed the West Indies cricket team, right? Many of them will have Hindu sounding names. How is it possible? Caribbean is so far away. It's part of North America region, Central America, North America region. It's because thousands of Indian workers and their families were transported throughout 1800s, 1900s by the British and dumped on these islands. They couldn't come back. And it was like bonded labor. They wouldn't pay them proper salaries. They wouldn't give them proper living conditions. So Indian workers have suffered a lot of horrors under the British rule. That's why indentured labor system is an abusive, exploitative system. But today, this has turned into an advantage for India. Today, it becomes a soft power for India in almost every former colony. You go to Fiji, you go to African countries, you go to Sri Lanka, you go to West Indies, you go to South America. The Indian community present, right? They provide us the soft power influence. They drive Indian diplomacy in these countries. So today it has become an advantage. So as part of this abusive indentured labor system, the British had transported a batch of Tamils. They settled them here. You can see this region here. This is the Sri Lankan Highlands, also called the Central Highlands of Sri Lanka. It's very similar to our Western Ghats. It's a mountainous area. The soil, the climate, everything is very similar. So obviously plantation crops grow very well. The commercial plantation crops like spices, then tea, rubber, right? So the British exploited this area for growing tea, spices, and rubber, which became the lifeline of the Sri Lankan economy. Even today, majority of Sri Lankan exports is tea, spices, and rubber. So these plantations were managed by Indian workers who were transported more recently and settled here. They are the Indian Tamils who came recently to Sri Lanka under the indentured labor system. The Sinhala Buddhists resented the Indian Tamils as they came recently, and the British started favoring them deliberately as part of their divide and rule policy. Remember, I told you in the first class, most of the issues in South Asia, it's all because of colonial blunders. It's all because of their divide and rule policy. We saw what happened with India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, the Hindu-Muslim divide, how they exploited it. The same was done in Sri Lanka as well between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The British were facing challenges in controlling the Ceylon colony, right? Ceylon was a separate colony of its own. So what they did was they deliberately favored the Tamil minorities. They deliberately favored Indian Tamils and then Sri Lankan Tamils as well and gave them attractive jobs in the government. They promoted them, gave them powerful, influential positions to make them rich and influential. So as minorities started rising to influence and power, it was resented by the majoritarian community, the Sinhala Buddhists. First of all, Sinhala Buddhists had a resentment against Indian Tamils who had come recently. Right? They didn't have much issues with Sri Lankan Tamils who had settled centuries ago. Their initial issue was with the Indian Tamils who came recently. Now that Tamil minorities across the region were becoming influential under British rule, it led to even more resentment and hatred and divisions between these groups. And unfortunately, this helped the radical Buddhists to drive their radical ideology. And this is ironic, it's highly unfortunate, because Buddhism is a religion of peace. It's rooted on the principle of ahimsa. But radical Buddhists in Sri Lanka, just like the radical Buddhists in Myanmar, they have committed brutal atrocities and committed large-scale human rights violations. This division was exploited by the radical Buddhists, the ethnic communal division that existed. It was capitalized by Sinhalese Buddhist politicians. They built their political base on these radical ideologies. Several Sri Lankan political parties, dominated by the Sinhala Buddhist majority, they tried pleasing the radical Buddhists so that they could get votes, so that they could win elections. So in the name of religion and ethnicity, these Sinhala Buddhist politicians, parties, and governments would go on to commit some of the most brutal violations of human rights that you have ever witnessed. Starting right from Sri Lanka's independence, the discrimination began. As the British left, Sri Lanka became independent by 1948. And immediately the discrimination and oppression started against the minorities. This is what happens when you encourage majoritarian tendencies on the lines of religion, ethnicity, race, etc. If you promote majoritarian communities, allow them to dominate, right, minorities will be crushed. If you promote right-wing extremist policies, this is exactly what happens in any country. And Sri Lanka started swinging towards right-wing extremism, radical Sinhala Buddhist extremism. So the initial government itself was a Sinhala Buddhist majority government, which was voted to power with the votes of radical Buddhists. So to please them, to remain politically influential, obviously the target were the Tamil community, especially Indian Tamils. As soon as Sri Lanka became independent and the first government was formed, they adopted a very controversial citizenship law through which Indian Tamils were declared stateless. Even though they had resided in Sri Lanka for almost 200 years, close to 200 years, even though they had blended with Sri Lankan society, they were rejected as Sri Lankan citizens and their citizenship was not recognized under these acts. Sri Lanka said, these Tamils, they are not Indians, they are not Sri Lankans. Sri Lanka said they are Indian responsibility. India is responsible for them. So Sri Lanka said these are not our people, they are not Sri Lankans. They are stateless right now. It is India's responsibility to take them back. They came from India, so let them go back to India. This was the approach of the Sri Lankan government. And once the Tamils became stateless, the Indian Tamils, it began a series of events which would lead to their discrimination and oppression, along with targeted violence against the community. This would cover the Sri Lankan Tamils as well. Initially, it started out against Indian Tamils, but very quickly, they escalated this to cover Sri Lankan Tamils as well. There were large-scale anti-Tamil riots which would happen frequently in Sri Lanka. These Sinhala Buddhists, the radicals, with the support of their government and police and security forces, there was state support for these radical elements. The police and security forces would back them, they would stand idle, and they would commit brutal atrocities against the Tamil population. Right? In various policies, government laws and policies, right? With regard to economic benefits, job opportunities, reservation, Tamils were being denied the opportunity. All right? The Sinhalese were being favored. There was outright favoring of the Sinhala Buddhists and open discrimination and oppression of the Tamils. In fact, the Tamil language was not even given equal recognition with the Sinhalese language. There was no equal recognition for the Tamil language. Even though it's a major religion or major language, the second major language spoken in Sri Lanka after Sinhalese. Right? Sinhalese is the major language. So only Sinhalese was prioritized by the government, given great treatment. But the Tamil language was discriminated, not even recognized as an official language. This was the scale of discrimination against the Tamils in Sri Lanka throughout these 2 decades, from 1950s to 1970s. In every law and policy, there was discrimination. The community was being left out, causing a huge economic divide. Social economic divide came up. Northern eastern provinces became backward. Right? Sri Lankan funds, investments will happen only in Sinhala areas, whereas no major projects were taken up in northern and eastern provinces. So as a result, social economic backwardness came up, and divisions also got created on social and economic lines. So Tamils were denied their opportunities, their rights, along with being targeted with violence. Anti-Tamil riots became a common feature. And the police, the authorities would not act against them. Along with that, Tamil language was humiliated. It was not given equal recognition, whereas Sinhalese was being promoted, being enforced on everyone. So this period triggered resentment amongst the Tamils. Obviously, when there is such oppression backed by the state, it's natural for resentment and hatred to grow against the other community. So this laid the foundation for Tamil resistance to take root. And as part of the Tamil resistance, there were few political groups that came up which wanted to fight for the rights of the Tamils. They largely believed in peaceful methods and constitutional methods. But there were others who were victims of all the violence and oppression. They wanted to take up nothing other than violence. They wanted to lead an armed rebellion against the Sri Lankan state to liberate the Tamil areas, to break the Tamil areas away from Sri Lanka and form an independent country called the Tamil Eelam, the Tamil nation. So this is how insurgency broke out in Sri Lanka. Some of the radical Tamils who took up militancy, who took up insurgency essentially, they founded many militant organizations. And the most prominent of them all is the LTTE. LTTE is the most prominent and dominant Sri Lankan outfit, right? It's a Tamil outfit formed by the radical Tamils who were victims of the targeted ethnic communal violence. So LTTE, which was formed by Prabhakaran, by V. Prabhakaran, he was the founder of the LTTE. Its stated objective was to break northern and eastern provinces, the Tamil areas out of Sri Lanka, liberate those areas and form an independent nation called the Tamil Eelam. In fact, LTTE stands for Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. All right. So by 1970s, by late 70s, Tamil militancy had started along with the political resistance movement. Few political groups were leading a fight, a constitutional fight asking for more rights. But parallelly, a militant movement rose up, leading to an armed revolutionary rebellion movement that broke out in the country. Now, in the middle of all these developments, India would get directly involved in the 70s and 80s. Especially under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, there was a direct Indian involvement in these developments, where Prime Minister Indira Gandhi launched a major covert operation, a covert proxy war, where we started backing the LTTE. India's RAW was authorized by the Prime Minister to meddle in Sri Lanka to directly support the militant movement along with the political movement that was rising. So the research and analysis wing would establish a strong influence in Sri Lanka. We would back not just the political movement by giving them funds and political diplomatic support, but we started working with LTTE as well. In fact, India played the biggest role in the rise of LTTE. We gave funds, weapons, and training. All right. Prabhakaran and the top leadership of LTTE, all the top mid commanders, they were all brought to India. They were all trained in Indian camps at several secret locations in India, which are camps of our security forces. That is where LTT rebels were trained by India. We would provide the funds and the weapons to escalate this movement in order to weaken Sri Lanka and to destabilize Sri Lanka. Now, this is a very controversial part of our history. Of course, it's never acknowledged by the Indian government, right? It remains a classified operation till date. But however, there are enough records, very credible, verifiable accounts of former officers, experts, and even media organizations, which clearly point out the links between RAW and the LTTE. It's not just some ordinary support from the outside. It was direct involvement, where we were smuggling weapons across the maritime boundary and landing it in Sri Lanka, where we were bringing the terrorists into India, training them and pushing them back to wage this war against Sri Lanka. It was that kind of extensive support that was given to the LTTE. That is how it became a formidable militant. It was initially a militant insurgent group, but eventually it became a brutal terrorist organization. And this covert operation of India would end up becoming one of our biggest foreign policy blunders. This involvement of India in the Sri Lankan conflict, right, would become a disastrous involvement with very, very disastrous consequences for India. Now, you might ask, why did India do this? What was the reason? Why did India get involved so deeply? And how come we backed an extremist outfit? There is a reason, a very valid reason, that initially was seen as justified. But later we realized that backing any extremist group will always backfire. Getting involved with insurgent terror groups could always backfire and come back to affect our own interests. We learned that lesson the hard way, and it was through LTTE and Sri Lanka. In 1970s, Sri Lanka had become a threat to India. The Sri Lankan government was increasingly becoming hostile to India. So that is why Prime Minister Indira Gandhi launched this covert operation to protect Indian interests, to ensure we destabilize Sri Lanka by meddling in their internal issue, so we get some leverage on Sri Lankan government, so we could force the Sri Lankan government to behave to protect and uphold Indian interests. But this strategy went out of control. The LTT went out of control, and it became a disastrous Indian involvement. In 1970s, during the 1971 war, where we were liberating Bangladesh and fighting Pakistan, Sri Lanka aligned with Pakistan. It gave support for Pakistani vessels and aircraft for refueling and resupplies when Pakistan was sending reinforcements from West Pakistan to East Pakistan. This obviously angered India because Pakistan was an enemy state. We were in a state of war with Pakistan, and our friendly neighbor Sri Lanka was supporting them, providing military logistical support. This was unacceptable to the Prime Minister and the Indian government. Then later, Sri Lanka allowed US to set up a controversial radio station in Colombo. Remember, at that point, US had become hostile as well. In mid 1970s, US had already aligned with Pakistan, threatened us in the 1971 war. We had aligned with Soviet Union because of that. So when US was a threat to us, it was already targeting our nuclear and space program. The CIA was trying to derail our nuclear and space program through active measures. When such threats existed for India, Sri Lanka allowed the US to set up a controversial radio station called Voice of America. It's a very popular radio station. It exists even today. But during the Cold War, it was believed that Voice of America is a front for the CIA. Understood? It is believed during the Cold War, the CIA was using Voice of America as just a front. That is, in the public domain, it looks like a radio station, broadcasting news, songs, media, etc. But in reality, behind the scenes, the communication equipment will be used for interception, to conduct surveillance, to intercept enemy communication. So, Voice of America was seen with suspicion around the world, especially in the non-aligned world and in the Soviet world. right? Because the Cold War had divided the countries. So when we had aligned with Soviet Union and US was a hostile threat to us, we knew by then that US was derailing our nuclear space program. At that critical time, Sri Lanka allowed Voice of America to be established at Colombo. India had opposed this very clearly. We had instructed Sri Lanka to not allow this to happen as it threatens our security and national interests. But when Sri Lanka allowed this to happen, it angered the Prime Minister and the Indian government. These were the primary root causes that led India to target Sri Lanka. We believed we could only destabilize the country, get some influence, because the divisions had already opened up. We didn't create the divisions. It was the Sinhala Buddhists, the Sri Lankan government, which had created the divisions, right? Plus, India had an obligation as well to defend, protect the Tamil minorities. The Tamils are connected to India morally, and even there are familial cultural links that exist in Tamil Nadu. So because of the cultural link, India had a duty, an obligation to defend and protect the Tamils as well. Plus, Sri Lanka was putting the entire refugee burden on India. It was pushing all the Tamils on India, asking India to take them in. So India had sufficient reasons to try and destabilize Sri Lanka. This is quite common in geopolitics, right? Officially, everyone might deny this, but this is how international relations work. Covert operations sometimes are needed. Sometimes targeting a country becomes a necessity to protect your core interests. But the problem is, to what extent will you do that? Will you go to the extent of sponsoring terrorism? Will you go to the extent of sponsoring an extremist group? Right? That is the question. So back then, such covert wars were very common, and India believed that this was the right strategy. We had backed Mukti Bahini rebels in East Pakistan to liberate Bangladesh. Right? We had also given funds, weapons, and training to Mukti Bahini. So we thought we could replicate the success. But the goal was not to divide Sri Lanka or break Sri Lanka apart. The goal was never to create a Tamil Elam. We didn't want that. We knew if Tamil nationalist sentiments are promoted in Sri Lanka, that would spill over to Tamil Nadu as well. There could be a side effect where nationalist sentiments might rise in Tamil Nadu. So we never wanted to break the Tamil areas or, to break Sri Lanka into two parts. The initial goal was just to destabilize the country, which will give us some influence, some leverage and control on the Sri Lankan government, so we can make the Sri Lankan government behave as it was becoming hostile to us. So to protect our core interests, this covert operation was launched, but unfortunately, we lost control over this conflict. Right? The LTTE would become a very notorious organization that went out of control, which would not only threaten the very existence of Sri Lanka, but it started threatening India itself. The Tamil nationalist sentiments would spread to Tamil Nadu. It got a lot of support in Tamil Nadu. Several political parties and even locals as well, to an extent. Several organizations, they started backing the LTTE. They started providing shelter, donations, and support to the LTTE's movement in Sri Lanka. This was driven by the atrocities that was happening against the Tamil community. Right? The Sri Lankan government, the radical Sinhala Buddhists, they were targeting, slaughtering Tamils every year. So naturally, a resentment had grown in Tamil Nadu as well. Support had come, and various parties and organizations created local support in Tamil Nadu, especially in the coastal areas. They took in the Tamil refugees. They took in even LTTE militants and terrorists, sheltered them, started giving them donations so they could operate against Sri Lanka. All right. The Tamil diaspora would also get involved later. The Tamil community is very well spread out in the world, from Australia to Canada, from UK to Malaysia, Singapore. Right? Around the world, there's a very strong Tamil diaspora, and some of them started funding the movement as well from abroad. So this made LTTE quite independent. It was not just dependent on India. Right? If we had full control over the group, we would have never allowed things to go out of control. Since LTTE started building its own network, it created a global network where it started working with organized criminal cartels that would smuggle drugs and arms. It built its own network with some global terror organizations. Is that clear? According to Indian intelligence, LTTE at one point had contacts with Pakistani terror groups, including Lashkar and others. It definitely had contacts with Pakistan's ISI. It also had contacts with Palestinian terror outfits. That was the kind of influence LTTE extended across the region, right? It didn't just depend on India for all the support. It became such a formidable organization that it built these contacts with other criminal cartels because it had a lot of global support, a lot of funds coming in, good contacts coming in because of the strong diaspora presence, which was helping them to an extent. It started working with many criminal cartels, procuring advanced arms and weapons. It would easily raise funds through drug trafficking as well and build contacts with other global terror outfits. It even had contacts with Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, right? This is the extent to which LTTE grew, posing a threat not just to Sri Lanka but to India itself. So, following the rise of LTTE, obviously they started targeting the Sri Lankan government and the radical Buddhists. So, this increased the violence. And as LTTE started attacking Sri Lanka, there were massive anti-Tamil riots again in 1983. It was a retaliation by the Sinhala Buddhists and the government. In the name of countering terrorism, in the name of tackling LTTE, they unleashed massive violence against innocent Tamilians that triggered a massive refugee crisis into India. All right, this was a devastating event. Essentially, Sri Lanka slipped into a full-fledged civil war. As LTTE started carrying out these attacks in late 70s and early 80s, the Sri Lankan government, with radical Buddhists, they retaliated with these anti-Tamil riots in the name of counter-terrorism. The Sri Lankan army had been given complete powers by the Sinhala Buddhist government to launch these so-called counter-terror operations. In the name of targeting LTTE, they targeted innocent civilians in northern and eastern provinces, destroyed entire Tamil villages. They mass slaughtered Tamilians with brutal killings, rapes, and whatnot. Women and children were also not spared, triggering a massive refugee crisis that affected India. A large influx of Tamil refugees was received into Tamil Nadu, and India accepted the refugees, took them in on humanitarian grounds. So this is where things started changing. Following the riots, the LTTE became even more determined that it will escalate the war. Following the riots, more support came in from Tamil Nadu and the Tamil diaspora, which made the group even more independent by 1984. Is that clear? Because of the increase in support following the riots, the LTTE became a more independent organization. All right, this is where we started losing control over LTTE because there were widespread sentiments which was sympathetic towards the Tamil cause. The Tamil diaspora around the world, they sympathized with the Tamils in Sri Lanka, and even in India, in Tamil Nadu, many of them sympathized with the Tamil cause. So as the support came in, as funds started coming in easily, contacts started coming in, LTT built its own global network and reduced its dependency on India. And in the same year, there was another devastating event, that is, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated because of Khalistan terror movement. Because of the Khalistan movement, which was Pakistan's covert war against India, her own bodyguards, her own Sikh bodyguards who were radicalized by Khalistan ideology, they assassinated the Prime Minister. This was revenge for Operation Blue Star, right? It was PM Indira Gandhi who had ordered Operation Blue Star to flush out Khalistani terrorists who were hiding in the sacred Golden Temple at Amritsar. Following this military raid of India inside Golden Temple, right, a lot of sentiments had grown within the Sikh community that India had attacked their sacred shrine. These extremists had called for the killing of the Prime Minister, and eventually her own bodyguards assassinated the Prime Minister. So this was a lesson for India, a very, very important lesson, that covert wars can backfire. It can have devastating consequences. the assassination of the Prime Minister was a result of Pakistan's covert war against India. It was Pakistan which was backing the Khalistan movement, right? India was countering it. And as part of this covert war between the two countries, the Prime Minister was assassinated by these extremists. This was a massive security and intelligence failure. See, it's not about the person, it's not just about the political party they belong to, it's about the office they hold. Your sitting Prime Minister being assassinated by a terror group, right, is the biggest security intelligence failure for any country. This, along with the independent rise of LTTE, changed India's approach towards the Sri Lankan conflict. Right? Now, the next government under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi took a very different approach towards the Sri Lankan crisis. Because on one hand, we had suffered a setback where a sitting Prime Minister had been assassinated and Khalistan movement started growing. By mid-80s, Khalistan movement was the biggest threat for us, a nightmare for us. Parallelly, when LTT became even more independent, started rising on its own, and Tamil nationalist sentiments spread into India as well. Tamil nationalist sentiments spread into Tamil Nadu. There were few elements in Tamil Nadu who gave a call for a Dravidian movement, a Tamil nationalist movement, to break Tamil areas in India and Sri Lanka together and form a Tamil Elam. Such movements started rising at the grassroots. So this became a threat for India's integrity itself. So a war we had sponsored was now backfiring on India, contributing to rise of Tamil nationalist sentiments, with the possibility of Tamil areas breaking away to form a separate nation. So immediately, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi started acting on it. He decided to scale back the support to LTT. Right? RAW ended some of its involvement with LTT, and we immediately tried mediating between the two sides. We decided we had to stabilize this situation, end this crisis, because on one hand, Tamil refugees were pouring in, causing a humanitarian situation, putting burden on India. On the other hand, Tamil nationalist sentiments had increased, and LTT was becoming powerful day by day. We realized that LTT is not just a threat for Sri Lanka, but a threat for India as well. And we had the Khalistan movement raging. Then came Kashmir, where insurgency terrorism increased in Kashmir, right? With parallel movements in Northeast India in the Naxal corridor. So multiple threats were present. So India decided to end the involvement. And from 85 to 86, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi mediated a settlement between Sri Lankan government and the Tamil groups. India was the direct mediator. Using some influence that we had with both of them, we brought both the parties to the negotiating table. We negotiated with the Sri Lankan government as well, and with LTT and other Tamil political groups and militant groups. Through this mediation, India worked out the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord of 1987. Please write this down. It's very, very important. Don't just think it's an old historical topic. It's not needed for the exam. Whatever I've explained is very, very relevant for the exam even today. Because related to Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord, there are some issues we have even today. And we keep asking Sri Lanka to follow the commitments it had made. Right? Just recently, in August, just 2 months ago, Sri Lankan president had come to India, Ranil Wickremesinghe. PM Modi and the foreign minister Jaishankar both reminded Sri Lanka that there are commitments from Sri Lanka which are pending from 1987. So UPSC might ask you questions on the peace accord, on Indian involvement in Sri Lanka, or the civil war in Sri Lanka could come as a question in IR, and trust me, it's a very big and very important topic. So India worked out a peace accord to end this conflict. It was mediated by Rajiv Gandhi, right? We brought all the parties together, negotiated this peace settlement, and the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord was signed. Now, you might ask why India signed the agreement. This should have been between LTT and the Sri Lankan government, right? India also signed the agreement. It's called India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord because we decided to deploy a peacekeeping force to enforce the accord. India carried out a direct intervention a military intervention was promised by Rajiv Gandhi to tackle the LTTE threat and to ensure that the peace accord is enforced as promised by all the parties. India promised to deploy a peacekeeping force to enforce the terms of the accord. So India is also a signatory to it. That's why it's called Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. All right. Now let us examine this peace accord. Let us understand the provisions and what happened after this. Under the peace accord, the first guarantee that India wanted was a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire. As the civil war was raging, large-scale violations were happening on both the sides. We wanted this human tragedy to end. We wanted the conflict to end. And we made it mandatory for both the sides to cease all the hostilities within 48 hours of signing the accord. We convinced the Sri Lankan government and LTTE that they have to end this war, cease the hostilities, call for a ceasefire, pull back the army to your barracks, and LTTE was supposed to surrender, lay down its arms and weapons and surrender. And Sri Lanka would promise not to target LTTE if they surrendered. And in return for this end to the conflict, for LTTE surrendering and Sri Lanka pulling back the troops, the Sri Lankan government would enact the 13th Amendment to its constitution to protect Tamil rights, to provide justice to the Tamil community following years of discrimination and oppression. So within the Sri Lankan constitution, autonomy should be promised. Provincial autonomy to northern and eastern provinces so that they can enjoy more rights and more powers and they can look after their welfare and their rights. In fact, before the 13th Amendment, the Tamil areas didn't have their own administration. Sri Lanka was a very centralized government where all the key subjects of administration were with the central government. There was no proper federal structure in Sri Lanka, especially in the Tamil areas, right? So Tamils could never have their own administrative setup. They couldn't contest elections properly. It was all dominated by the Sinhala Buddhists, by the central government of Sri Lanka. This was changed by India. We mandated that Sri Lanka should enact this amendment, the 13th Amendment, through which provincial governments will be set up. Constitutional autonomy will be given for Northern Province and Eastern Province, and local elections will be held, provincial elections will be held. So Tamil parties can contest, win the elections, and they can form the provincial governments where they can look after their own administration. This was the promise made, the devolution of powers through constitutional autonomy. All right. So these were the key agreements that was part of the peace accord. Now, all the parties agreed to the accord. Sri Lanka signed the agreement. LTT also agreed to surrender. They called for a ceasefire as well. And as promised, India deployed the IPKF. We thought everything will be over in few days. It will be maybe few days, few weeks of deployment. So soldiers were drawn from Indian Army and from few other central forces to form the IPKF. It was a peacekeeping force. Please understand, it's a peacekeeping mission. It's not a combat mission. They were not sent to fight a war. They were sent to maintain the peace, to maintain the ceasefire, to ensure both sides are maintaining the ceasefire. That is the task of a peacekeeping mission. So obviously, the Indian soldiers were not prepared. They didn't have enough weapons, intelligence, maps, right? They were being sent on a peacekeeping mission, which is a completely different mission. It's not a combat mission. But after landing, after deploying the troops, after IPKF was deployed, both the sides betrayed India. It's one of the biggest betrayals for India. The Sri Lankan government and especially the LTT, they both refused to follow the terms. They did not implement the ceasefire. Sri Lanka continued targeting the LTT and LTT refused to surrender. Both the sides were blaming India for what had happened. Sri Lanka obviously blamed India because it said India was the one which sponsored LTT. India was the one which escalated the violence by sponsoring these extremists. So Sri Lanka wanted revenge against India. LTTE saw that India's support was hollow. LTTE realized that India was never supporting the Tamil cause. It was only playing geopolitics by using the Tamil cause. That's how it saw India's assistance. So LTTE decided to take revenge against India, especially against the Rajiv Gandhi government. Right? As Rajiv Gandhi had mediated a settlement calling for an end to the war, LTTE rebelled against India after signing the accord. So LTTE refused to surrender and continued the war, and Sri Lanka also continued targeting LTTE. In the middle of this, our Indian soldiers got trapped. And according to many reports, there was a collusion which happened, right, of where Indian troops are deployed. It would pass on this information to LTTE so they could target Indian troops and take revenge against India. This was the tragedy that occurred, right? It was a failed strategy of India. It became a disastrous involvement. The peace accord was a failure, right? The peace did not, it didn't continue. The ceasefire didn't happen. And according to many reports, the Sri Lankan forces, the Sri Lankan intelligence, Sri Lankan government, they knew where Indian troops are being deployed. They knew we weren't well equipped because it was a peacekeeping mission. And they started leaking the information, the intelligence to LTTE, which started targeting Indian troops. So now this turned into a combat mission where Indian troops had to defend themselves against the attacks coming from LTTE. And we weren't getting enough support from Sri Lanka. So this involvement, this military intervention became disastrous for us. We ended up losing close to 1,000 Indian soldiers. Around 900 to 1,000 Indian soldiers were killed in this peacekeeping mission. The war became highly controversial in India. By then, PM Rajiv Gandhi had resigned following an internal domestic crisis, right? PM Rajiv Gandhi had stepped down, and we had few coalition governments in 89 and 90. In India, tremendous pressure came from the public as to why India was involved in Sri Lanka to this extent. Why every day Indian soldiers are coming back dead in body bags. So it became a big political question. Opposition was raising questions. Media was criticizing it, right? The public were asking for answers. So as the Indian involvement became disastrous, it became a tragedy. Finally, the IPKF was withdrawn. Is that clear? By the time they were withdrawn, LTTE had committed brutal killings, killed almost close to 1,000 Indian soldiers. So now, LTTE was nothing other than a terrorist group. A group we had nurtured at one point, now targeting India itself. This is the drawback of such covert wars. Every country has learned this lesson, be it US, be it Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel. Anyone who has sponsored extremists, they have seen the consequences come later. It happened with India in the case of Sri Lanka. Now, LTTE was our target. At any cost, LTTE had to be wiped out for what it had done to Indian soldiers and how it had destabilized the whole region. Not just Sri Lanka, even southern India and the Indian Ocean had been destabilized by LTTE. Drug trafficking, arms smuggling was rampant because of LTTE across the region, right? So now India had to change the strategy to target LTTE. All right. So this is where I would like to stop. We can continue in the next class. We'll continue from here, from 1990. What happened after this? How India managed to deal with the situation, how relations developed. We'll examine the current relations as well and talk about the economic crisis, the major projects we have, the competition we have with China. So that will complete this chapter. And after that, we'll have a quick look at other island countries, that is Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles, and some groupings of the Indian Ocean. So all this is for the next class. So let's stop here.